On December 25, 2024, in the snow-covered forests of Wyoming, the day began like any other for Officer Adam Miller and his partner, Sarah Bennett. Both were seasoned police officers known for their dedication and bravery. Adam, a 37-year-old father of two, had been on the force for 15 years. His calm demeanor made him a pillar of strength in their department. Sarah, 29, had joined the force 3 years prior. With her sharp instincts and unyielding determination, she quickly gained respect among her peers. Adam and Sarah were patrolling near the Wind River Range, an area known for its rugged beauty and dangerous wildlife. Around noon, they received a call about a potential injured animal sighting deep in the forest. Local authorities suspected poaching activity, a growing problem in the region. The two officers were dispatched to investigate, equipped with standard gear but unaware of the peril awaiting them. The drive to the remote site was treacherous. Snow blanketed the narrow roads, and towering pines cast long shadows under the overcast sky. By 2 p.m., they reached the location and parked their vehicle. A chilling silence enveloped the area, broken only by the occasional rustling. As they walked deeper into the woods, they came across a tragic scene. A massive grizzly bear lying lifeless in the snow. Evidence of poaching was clear. The bear had been shot multiple times, and its paws had been crudely severed, likely for illegal trade. The officers were overcome with anger and sorrow at the senseless act. While Adam examined the bear's wounds, Sarah scanned the surroundings for clues. Suddenly, the sound of snapping branches caught her attention. She turned to see a colossal grizzly emerging from the thicket, its eyes blazing with fury. It was clear this bear was no ordinary encounter. It had likely been the mate of the poached animal, and now it was driven by rage. Before Adam could react, the bear charged with startling speed. It struck him with its massive paw, sending him sprawling to the ground. The force broke several ribs and left Adam struggling to breathe as the bear began to maul him viciously. Sarah raised her firearm, but the bear was relentless. She aimed and fired, but the bear turned its attention to her before she could act again. The bear slashed Sarah across the face, leaving deep bleeding wounds that blurred her vision. In sheer panic and pain, Sarah staggered back, realizing she was outmatched. Summoning her remaining strength, she retreated toward their vehicle, using the forest's dense cover to evade the bear. Back at the car, she managed to call for backup before collapsing from exhaustion and blood loss. The forest fell silent once more, save for the distant roar of the bear and the soft hum of approaching sirens. The nightmare was far from over, but reinforcements were on their way. The scene of terror would remain etched in Sarah's mind forever. As Sarah lay near the patrol vehicle, the faint sound of sirens in the distance gave her hope. Her vision was blurred by the blood trickling from her wounds, and her body trembled in the freezing cold. Every second felt like an eternity, and the harrowing sounds of the bear's roars still echoed in her mind. The backup team responding to her distress call arrived within an hour, bringing with them paramedics and wildlife experts. The rescue team found the scene more horrifying than they could have imagined. Adam's lifeless body was discovered near the remains of the poached bear. His injuries were extensive, with deep lacerations and multiple fractures caused by the bear's relentless attack. Sarah, barely conscious, was immediately treated for her injuries on site. Her face bore severe claw marks, and her body showed signs of extensive bruising from her desperate escape. The paramedics stabilized Sarah and transported her to the nearest hospital, where she was rushed into surgery. Meanwhile, the wildlife officers began tracking the bear, knowing the animal still posed a significant danger. The trail led them deeper into the forest, where the bear's tracks mingled with the blood-stained snow. The team acted cautiously, understanding the unpredictable nature of an enraged grizzly. Hours later, the bear was located in another part of the forest, where it had taken refuge. After careful deliberation, the officers made the decision to euthanize the animal. They recognized the tragedy of the situation. both for the bear, whose mate had been killed, and for the officers who had become victims of the encounter. Back in town, Sarah's recovery was slow and painful. The physical scars were matched by the emotional trauma she carried from that day. She struggled to cope with the loss of Adam, who had been more than just a colleague. Their bond as partners had been forged over years of shared challenges and victories on the force. His absence left a void that no one could fill. Adam's funeral was held a week later, attended by hundreds of fellow officers, friends, and family members. He was remembered as a dedicated officer, a loving father, and a hero who had given his life in the line of duty. Sarah, though still recovering, attended the ceremony with her face partially bandaged. She delivered a heartfelt tribute, vowing to honor his memory by advocating for stricter measures against poaching and increased safety protocols for officers working in wildlife zones. The incident sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Local authorities launched an extensive investigation into the poaching activity, determined to bring those responsible to justice. The event also reignited conversations about the delicate balance between human activity and wildlife preservation. Conservationists emphasized the need for better education and enforcement to prevent such tragic encounters in the future. For Sarah, the path to healing was long and arduous. She underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage caused by the bear's claws and endured months of physical therapy. Despite the challenges, she returned to the force, driven by a renewed sense of purpose. Her experience became a powerful reminder of the dangers faced by those who protect and serve, often at great personal cost. The forest where the attack occurred remained a somber place, marked by the memory of that fateful Christmas day. A memorial plaque was later installed near the site, honoring Adam's sacrifice and serving as a stark reminder of the unpredictable forces of nature. For those who visited, it was a place to reflect on the fragility of life and the courage of those who risk everything to uphold their duty. In July 2021, brothers Nathan and Ryan Parker set off into Wyoming's Wind River Range, eager to spend a few days immersed in the rugged backcountry they both loved. Seasoned hikers and experienced outdoors people, the brothers knew the risks of trekking through bear country. Armed with bear spray, whistles, and a solid knowledge of wildlife behavior, they felt prepared for anything nature could throw their way. But as the sun climbed high on the second day of their trip, they encountered something that caught them off guard: a grizzly bear cub. It was a small thing, no larger than a medium-sized dog, playing near a fallen tree stump. The cub played, occasionally swatting at something in the dirt with oversized paws. The brothers froze at first, their instincts kicking in. A lone cub was a dangerous sight. No matter how cute the cub was, it was also a red flag in the wilderness. They scanned the surrounding trees for any sign of the mother. For several long moments, there was nothing but silence. No snapping branches, no rustling foliage. Just the cub, rolling lazily in the dirt. Against their better judgment, they approached cautiously, enchanted by the scene unfolding before them. Nathan suggested the cub might be lost, separated from its mother. It wasn't unheard of. Ryan agreed but hesitated. His gut told him to stay back, to let nature take its course. Yet the sight of the helpless creature tugged at something deep inside him. They inched closer, keeping their movements slow and deliberate. The cub noticed them and stopped playing, tilting its head curiously. It mimicked their cautious steps, shuffling closer to the brothers as they crept forward. Its small, dark eyes sparkled with an almost childlike innocence. For a moment, Nathan and Ryan forgot where they were, the weight of their surroundings slipping away as they watched the cub's playful antics. But then, a growl rumbled from the forest. It came from the direction they had just scanned moments earlier, dense trees that had seemed empty and silent. Both men turned sharply toward the sound, their hearts pounding. The growl deepened, reverberating through the still air. Then, the mother grizzly emerged. She was massive, a nightmarish creature. Her sheer size made the ground tremble as she stepped into the clearing. Her fur bristled, and her lips curled back to reveal yellowed teeth as long as daggers. Her eyes locked on the brothers, and her ears flattened against her head. She had seen enough to conclude that these two humans were too close to her cub. Nathan and Ryan both froze. They knew what was coming before it happened, but there was no time to react. The bear let out an explosive roar and charged. The grizzly covered the ground between them with terrifying speed. Nathan stumbled backward, fumbling for his bear spray. Ryan tried to shout, but the bear's growls swallowed the sound. Before either of them could act, the bear plowed into Ryan with the force of a freight train. The impact sent him sprawling, his body slamming into the hard ground with a sickening thud. Nathan screamed as the bear reared up, towering over his brother. Its claws gleamed in the sunlight, curved and deadly. It came down with incredible force, slashing across Ryan's chest. Blood sprayed onto the grass, staining the earth. Ryan writhed beneath the bear's massive weight, his arms flailing in an attempt to protect his head and neck. Nathan finally pulled the bear spray from his pack, his hands shaking as he aimed. He pressed the nozzle, releasing a cloud of orange mist toward the bear's face. The grizzly flinched, shaking violently as the irritant burned its eyes and nose. Its massive body pivoted toward Nathan. For a moment, Nathan thought it might turn its rage on him. The bear's bloodshot eyes locked onto him, its muscles coiling as if preparing to charge again. But then the cub released a high-pitched bleat from behind the tree stump. The mother turned, her ears swiveling toward the sound. With one final growl, she turned toward her cub and left Ryan writhing in agony. Nathan didn't wait to see where she went. He sprinted to Ryan's side, his mind racing as he tried to assess the damage. Ryan's chest was torn open, deep gashes crisscrossing his torso. Blood poured from the wounds, soaking into the dirt beneath him. His breathing was shallow, each gasp a desperate struggle. Nathan pressed his hands against the largest wound, trying to staunch the bleeding, but it was clear Ryan's injuries were serious. Time blurred as Nathan fumbled for his satellite phone, his fingers slick with blood. He called for help, his voice barely audible over his panicked breaths. The dispatcher promised a rescue team would be dispatched immediately, but Nathan knew they were deep in the wilderness. It would take hours for help to arrive. Ryan's eyes fluttered open briefly, his gaze unfocused. Nathan gripped his hand, willing him to hold on. The forest sounds seemed distant, muted, as if the world had paused to acknowledge the horror unfolding in this remote clearing. When the rescue team finally arrived by helicopter, Ryan was unconscious. Paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher. Nathan watched helplessly as the helicopter lifted off, carrying his brother toward what he hoped was salvation. Hours later, in the sterile halls of a hospital, Nathan received the news he had dreaded. Ryan's injuries were too severe. He had succumbed to blood loss and trauma during the flight. The weight of the news crushed Nathan, leaving him hollow. The incident sparked media attention, with headlines decrying the dangers of bear encounters and the consequences of misinterpreting wildlife behavior. Experts warned against approaching bear cubs, no matter how harmless they appeared. The Parkers' tragedy became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of nature's unpredictability. Nathan returned to the Wind River Range months later, unable to shake the memories of that day. The clearing where his brother had fallen was eerily quiet, the grass regrown over the blood-stained earth. Standing there, he realized the wilderness was beautiful, but ultimately indifferent to human hurt. In October 2020, Dr. Evan Wallace was deep into his research on grizzly bear behavior in a national park in the northwest corner of Wyoming. With a strong work ethic, he had spent weeks tracking bear activity, documenting their feeding patterns, and observing their behavior in preparation for a career-defining publication. His camp was in a remote valley near a river, far from tourists and day hikers. The isolation allowed him to immerse himself in his work, but it also came with risks. The last week had been relentless. Evan barely slept, determined to capture every piece of data. His campsite was a hub of activity: motion sensor cameras, scent traps, and even an animal carcass dragged into the area to draw bears closer for observation. It was a calculated risk, but one he believed he had mitigated with proper precautions. The night of October 17th was bitterly cold. A strong wind whipped through the valley, and the sky, devoid of clouds, glittered with stars. Exhausted, Evan had fallen into a heavy sleep inside his small nylon tent, his laptop still open beside him. He had no idea that the scent of the carcass, just 50 yards from camp, had drawn the attention of something massive lurking in the darkness. The grizzly moved silently, its hulking frame barely making a sound as it approached the camp. The bear had likely been following the scent trail for hours, its instincts honed by years of surviving in the national park's harsh conditions. At first, it circled the perimeter, sniffing the air and picking up traces of Evan's presence, human but alone and vulnerable. The bear's curiosity turned to boldness. It pushed through the camp's outer edge, its nose twitching as it followed the mingling scents of the carcass and human. Evan's tent, though zipped tightly, did little to mask the smells within. The bear's breathing quickened as it approached the flimsy structure, its claws raking against the earth with every step. Without warning, the grizzly swiped at the tent. The nylon ripped open like paper, exposing Evan's sleeping form. Sharp, icy air flooded the tent, but Evan, lost in the depths of exhaustion, didn't stir. The bear's head pushed inside, its wet nose brushing against his shoulder. Without warning, the bear's jaws clamped down on Evan's leg, dragging him halfway out of the tent in a single, brutal motion. The sudden pain jolted him awake, but his groggy mind struggled to process the chaos. The bear's claws followed, raking across his torso, tearing through his jacket and flesh with horrifying ease. Evan screamed, his instincts finally kicking in, but it was too late. The bear's massive paw struck him across the chest, the force of the blow snapping ribs like twigs. Blood spattered across the shredded remnants of the tent, staining the ground. He tried to crawl away, his hands clawing at the dirt, but the bear pinned him with its weight, the sheer size of its frame overwhelming him completely. The bear's jaws sought his neck, its powerful teeth puncturing deep into flesh and muscle. Evan's attempts to fight back grew weaker with every second, his movements slowing as blood loss took its toll. The bear's growls echoed through the camp, a terrifying reminder of its dominance, its primal power unleashed without mercy. Around the campsite, the chaos became evident. Motion sensor cameras, still active, captured fragments of the attack. The bear's silhouette towering over Evan's crumpled form, its massive head jerking as it tore into its prey. The equipment scattered across the ground seemed almost mocking in its uselessness. The attack lasted minutes, though it felt like an eternity. When the bear finally retreated, dragging Evan's broken body toward the edge of the camp, it left behind a scene of devastation. The tent was shredded, the carcass bait untouched, and the air reeked of blood and earth. By morning, fellow researchers, stationed miles away, arrived at the camp to check on Evan after he failed to respond to scheduled radio calls. What they found shook them to their cores. The ground was stained dark red, claw marks gouged deep into the earth. Evan's mangled remains lay partially buried near the tree line, a sign that the bear had begun caching its kill. The team's shock quickly gave way to dread. Evan's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a reminder of the dangers that even the most experienced individuals faced in the wild. His exhaustion, a byproduct of his dedication, had likely dulled his ability to sense danger. The camp's proximity to the carcass, intended to be an asset to his research, had sealed his fate. Wildlife authorities and park officials were called in to investigate. The bear responsible for the attack, identified by tracks and camera footage, was classified as a high-risk threat to humans, tracked down, and euthanized. The decision sparked heated debates among conservationists, many of whom argued that the bear had acted on instinct, its aggression fueled by hunger and the encroachment of human activity into its territory. Evans' colleagues mourned him deeply, but his death also forced them to confront harsh realities. The risks they accepted as part of their work were not abstract. The wilderness did not differentiate between predator and prey, researcher and wanderer. The bizarre nature of the event captured widespread attention. News outlets highlighted the incident, raising questions about safety protocols in bear country. Experts debated whether sleep deprivation and the use of bait had contributed to the tragedy, and calls for stricter guidelines grew louder. For those who knew Evan personally, the public discourse did little to dull their grief. He had been a brilliant researcher whose passion for wildlife was matched only by his drive to make a difference. His final moments, though horrifying, were a testament to the unpredictability of the natural world he sought to understand. Quiet evening in August 2023, Mark, a seasoned camper known for his love of the outdoors, ventured into the heart of Alaska's remote forests. He was no stranger to the wilderness. Over the years, he had explored countless trails and survived harsh weather conditions. At 45 years old, Mark was respected in his hiking community for his resourcefulness and knowledge of survival skills. His favorite pastime was escaping the hustle of city life to find solace in nature's untouched beauty. This particular journey was meant to be a short getaway. Equipped with a sturdy tent, basic camping gear, and his trusted survival knife, Mark planned for a peaceful night under the stars. By late afternoon, he reached a secluded clearing, surrounded by towering pines and the soft hum of a nearby stream. As the sun began to set, the vibrant orange hues reflected off the water, casting a serene glow across the campsite. At 11 p.m., Mark was preparing his campfire, a routine he had performed countless times. The crackle of the flames provided warmth and comfort in the chilly night. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves broke the calm. Mark froze, his senses heightened. He turned toward the sound, expecting perhaps a deer or another harmless animal. Instead, emerging from the dense brush, a massive grizzly bear stood before him, its size amplified by the shadows of the firelight. The bear's sudden appearance startled Mark. Before he could react, the animal charged with a force that knocked him off his feet. The initial blow left him dazed, and he barely had time to grasp his knife before the bear was upon him. Its powerful jaws clamped down, tearing into his chest. Mark suffered deep gashes across his torso, blood soaking his shirt as the bear mauled him relentlessly. He tried to fend it off, swinging his knife in desperation, but his strength was waning with each passing second. The bear's aggression seemed endless, and Mark felt his energy draining. Yet, as suddenly as it had attacked, the bear paused, its focus shifting. Perhaps satisfied or sensing no further threat, it began to retreat into the darkness, leaving Mark battered and bleeding. As the adrenaline wore off, Mark's mind raced with the realization of his condition. He was alone, gravely injured, and miles from help. With dawn still hours away, Mark mustered his remaining strength. The cold intensified his pain, each shallow breath a reminder of the gaping wounds on his chest. The night dragged on as he lay motionless, conserving what little energy he had, waiting for the first light of day to guide him to safety. On the morning after Mark endured the harrowing bear attack, the sun rose over the vast Alaskan wilderness, casting a pale golden light over the dense forests and rocky terrain. Despite his excruciating pain and critical injuries, Mark's survival instincts took over. He knew he had to act quickly if he wanted to live. His chest throbbed with agony, and the deep gashes from the bear's claws made every breath a struggle. The bear's mauling had left his chest severely injured, with lacerations and bruises covering his torso. Weak but determined, Mark began crawling in the direction of the ranger station he had seen on his map earlier. Each inch forward was a victory, though the effort drained him quickly. The ground beneath him was uneven, littered with roots and rocks, and the weight of his injuries pressed him further into the earth. His movements caused fresh pain to radiate from his wounds, and blood seeped through the makeshift bandage he had fashioned from his torn shirt. Yet he held on to the hope that help was within reach. The journey was grueling. Hours stretched on as Mark dragged himself through the wilderness, pausing only to catch shallow breaths and reassess his path. The memories of the bear's attack replayed in his mind. He remembered the immense size of the beast, the sound of its growls, and the sheer force of its charge. Despite the trauma, he focused on staying alert, fearing another predator might emerge. By midday, Mark's energy was nearly gone. Dehydration and blood loss made him lightheaded, and he began to question whether he could continue. But then, in the distance, he spotted a sign of human presence, a trail marker indicating the direction of the ranger station. The sight renewed his determination, and he pushed forward inch by inch, ignoring the searing pain in his chest and limbs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mark reached the ranger station. It was a small wooden structure surrounded by tall trees. He used the last of his strength to knock on the door, his voice barely audible as he called out for help. The rangers inside quickly sprang into action, shocked by the sight of his injuries. They noted the deep claw marks across his chest and the pallor of his skin, indicating significant blood loss. An airlift was arranged immediately. Mark was carefully transported to the nearest hospital, where medical staff worked tirelessly to stabilize him. The doctors commended his resilience, amazed that he had managed to survive the ordeal and make it to safety on his own. The wounds on his chest required extensive stitches, and his recovery would involve months of physical therapy to regain his strength. News of Mark's encounter spread quickly, sparking discussions about the dangers of camping in bear territory and the importance of preparedness. Experts highlighted the need for campers to carry bear spray, avoid hiking alone, and store food properly to minimize the chances of an encounter. For Mark, the aftermath of the attack was more than physical. While his body slowly healed, the emotional scars remained. He found himself reliving the terror in his dreams, often waking in a cold sweat. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, he resolved to use his experience as a lesson. He began sharing his story with others, emphasizing the respect and caution that nature demands. Mark never returned to the Alaskan wilderness, but his love for the outdoors persisted in a different form. He became an advocate for wilderness safety, encouraging others to explore responsibly and with the right tools. Though the attack had changed him forever, it also gave him a newfound appreciation for life and the resilience of the human spirit. October morning in 2008, Mark Harris, a seasoned television journalist, found himself in the rugged wilderness of Montana. Known for his charismatic style and passion for storytelling, Mark was no stranger to nature. Over the years, he had traveled the globe, reporting on environmental issues and wildlife conservation. This time, he was on assignment for a live segment of a popular nature show, aiming to bring viewers a closer look at the majestic grizzly bears of North America. Mark's career had always been driven by curiosity. Born and raised in Denver, Colorado, he grew up exploring the Rocky Mountains with his father, a wildlife photographer. His early exposure to the beauty and unpredictability of nature shaped his love for the outdoors. After earning a degree in journalism, Mark pursued a career that combined his passion for storytelling and wildlife. By 2008, he was a respected name in his field, known for his commitment to educating the public about nature's wonders and its dangers. For this particular segment, Mark had spent days in the wilderness with a small, dedicated crew. Their base was near the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, a vast and untamed expanse in Montana. This region was home to one of the largest grizzly bear populations in the United States. The team had been tracking a bear for 3 days, hoping to capture close-up footage of its behavior. Their goal was to provide viewers with a rare glimpse into the life of this iconic predator, while emphasizing the importance of coexisting with wildlife. As the crew prepared for the live broadcast, the atmosphere was a mix of excitement and tension. The team had spotted a large grizzly earlier that morning, and Mark was eager to bring the majestic creature into focus for his audience. The plan was simple, but risky. Stay at a safe distance while filming and avoid any sudden movements that might disturb the bear. When the broadcast began, Mark stood against the backdrop of towering pines and rugged peaks. His voice was calm and steady as he described the grizzly's habitat and behavior. Just as he was explaining the bear's role in the ecosystem, a large figure emerged from the shadows. A grizzly bear, drawn by curiosity, ambled into view, its massive frame and shaggy coat commanding attention. Mark continued speaking, trying to maintain his composure while signaling the crew to stay still. The bear paused, sniffing the air, and then started moving toward them. The crew froze, hoping the animal would lose interest and wander away. But as Mark adjusted his camera for a clearer shot, the movement startled the bear. In an instant, the grizzly charged, covering the distance between them with terrifying speed. Mark barely had time to react before the animal knocked him to the ground. His shoulder and arm were grazed by the bear's claws, leaving shallow wounds. The camera, still rolling, captured the heart-stopping moment as the crew scrambled to distract the bear and help Mark. Their quick thinking saved his life. The injuries he sustained were minor, but the encounter left everyone shaken. The bear eventually retreated, leaving the team in stunned silence. The footage, though horrifying, became a stark reminder of the risks involved in interacting with wildlife. The aftermath of the encounter left an indelible mark on Mark Harris and his team. As the grizzly disappeared back into the dense forest, the group worked quickly to assess the situation. Mark was shaken, but managed to sit up with the help of his crew. His grazed shoulder and arm bled lightly, but the wounds were not deep. Despite the physical injuries being minor, the emotional toll of the event was far greater. The team realized the gravity of what had just occurred. They were not only documenting nature, but had also become part of its unpredictable dangers. The broadcast, which continued recording through the chaos, had captured every terrifying second of the bear's charge and Mark's narrow escape. Though unplanned, the footage was destined to become a stark reminder of the risks involved in such assignments. As soon as Mark's condition was stable, the crew made their way back to the nearest ranger station. It was a long journey over rough terrain, with everyone remaining on high alert, fearing another possible encounter with wildlife. When they finally reached safety, the park rangers provided first aid and took a detailed report of the incident. The rangers explained that such aggressive behavior in grizzlies was uncommon unless the bear felt threatened or startled. They suspected the animal had been drawn to the crew by unfamiliar smells or movements. The footage, once reviewed, revealed the full intensity of the moment. It showed the bear's calculated movements, the swift charge, and the chaos that followed. This visual documentation quickly gained attention, first among colleagues in the wildlife filming community, and then across news platforms worldwide. When the segment aired, it sparked a massive conversation about the ethics and safety of interacting with wildlife for entertainment and education. Mark became the center of this discussion. While some praised his bravery and dedication, others criticized the risks involved in the team's methods. The incident led to a reassessment of safety protocols for filming wildlife. Experts stressed the importance of maintaining greater distances from animals and using long-range equipment to minimize direct interaction. For Mark, the experience was transformative. Though he continued his career in wildlife journalism, he approached future assignments with greater caution. He used the encounter as a teaching moment, emphasizing the need for respect and distance when engaging with the natural world. The impact of the footage was not limited to the world of journalism. Conservationists used it to highlight the challenges of human-wildlife coexistence. The footage served as a reminder that while nature's beauty is captivating, its power and unpredictability demand respect. In the small community near the filming location, the incident also led to changes. The park authorities launched new guidelines for visitors and professionals working in the area, including stricter rules about approaching wildlife. Informational campaigns were introduced to educate tourists and filmmakers about the importance of minimizing disturbances to animals in their natural habitat. Though the encounter was brief, its effects rippled far and wide. Mark's minor injuries healed, but the lessons he learned shaped his work and advocacy for years to come. The grizzly encounter remained a vivid reminder of the fine line between admiration and intrusion in the wild. In July 2022, the Harris family embarked on a long-awaited hiking adventure in the picturesque Cascade Mountains of Washington state. Doug Harris, a 45-year-old biology teacher, had always been passionate about the outdoors and saw this as an opportunity to share his love for nature with his teenage son, Ethan, 15, and his wife, Linda, 42, a graphic designer. The trip had been meticulously planned for weeks, with detailed itineraries and a backpack filled with essentials. The family hoped to bond over the beauty of the rugged trails and serene landscapes. The day began with clear skies and a cool breeze, perfect conditions for hiking. Doug led the way with his trail map, occasionally stopping to point out interesting flora and fauna. Ethan, curious and adventurous, peppered his father with questions about the wildlife, while Linda trailed behind, snapping photos of the breathtaking scenery. After hours of hiking, the trio decided to take a break by a shallow creek surrounded by dense evergreens. As they sat on large rocks near the water, enjoying their packed lunch, the peaceful setting was suddenly interrupted by rustling sounds from the nearby bushes. Doug assured the family it was likely a deer or small animal, but the noise grew louder and closer. Moments later, a large mother bear emerged from the thicket, followed closely by her two cubs. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Doug instinctively signaled for his family to remain calm and slowly back away, but the curious bear viewed their movement as a potential threat to her cubs. Without warning, the mother bear charged. Doug shouted for Ethan and Linda to run while he stood his ground. The bear reached him in seconds, knocking him to the ground with immense force. The bear began mauling Doug, clawing at his chest and arms as he struggled to protect himself. Ethan, frozen in fear, watched helplessly until Doug yelled for him to run. Summoning courage, Ethan sprinted into the forest, his heart pounding as he stumbled through the uneven terrain. Linda followed closely, tears streaming down her face as she prayed for her family's safety. Behind them, Doug's shouts faded into the distance. The family's once idyllic trip had turned into a nightmare. Ethan kept running, desperate to find help, as Linda struggled to keep up. Unaware of what was happening to Doug, they could only hope that someone would come to their rescue. The Harris family's harrowing ordeal had just begun, and their resolve would soon be tested in ways they could never have imagined. Ethan ran as fast as his legs could carry him, the dense forest around him becoming a blur of green and brown. His breaths were shallow and rapid, and his chest ached from the effort. Linda trailed behind, her fear for Doug fueling her determination to keep up. The uneven ground slowed their progress, but Ethan kept pushing forward, knowing every second mattered. The sound of his father's struggle with the bear echoed faintly in his mind, spurring him onward. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan and Linda reached a small clearing where they spotted a narrow dirt path. They followed it, hoping it would lead to other hikers or rangers who could help. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows that made the forest seem even more daunting. Finally, after another mile of running, they came across a group of campers setting up their site near the trail. The campers quickly understood the gravity of the situation as Ethan and Linda breathlessly explained what had happened. One of the campers, equipped with a satellite phone, immediately contacted the park rangers. While they waited for help, the campers provided water and tried to reassure Ethan and Linda, though the fear in their eyes betrayed their own uncertainty. Meanwhile, back in the woods, Doug lay motionless on the forest floor. The bear had dragged him several feet into the underbrush, leaving deep gashes across his chest and arms. His clothes were torn and his breathing was shallow, but he was alive. The bear, seemingly satisfied that the perceived threat to her cubs was gone, had retreated into the forest. When the rangers arrived, they moved quickly, following Ethan and Linda's guidance to the area where the attack had occurred. The dense terrain made the search challenging, and darkness was beginning to fall. After nearly an hour of combing the area, they found Doug. His injuries were severe, and he was unconscious but still clinging to life. The rangers stabilized him as best they could, applying pressure to his wounds to stop the bleeding. Doug was carried out of the forest on a stretcher to a waiting helicopter that had been called to airlift him to the nearest hospital. Ethan and Linda watched as the helicopter took off, their relief mixed with anxiety about the extent of Doug's injuries. In the days that followed, Doug underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage caused by the attack. His chest and arms bore deep scars, a permanent reminder of the encounter. Though his physical wounds began to heal, the emotional trauma lingered. Doug struggled with flashbacks of the attack and found it difficult to sleep. For Ethan, the experience left a lasting impression. The image of his father's bravery stayed with him, inspiring a newfound respect for the wilderness and its dangers. Linda, too, found herself more cautious, her love for the outdoors tempered by the memory of that terrifying day. The incident prompted the park to implement stricter guidelines for hikers, including clearer signage about wildlife and the dangers of straying from marked trails. The Harris family's ordeal became a cautionary tale for others, serving as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between humans and nature. Though their lives would never be the same, the Harris family remained grateful that they had all survived. Together they worked to support each other through the long process of recovery, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced in the Cascade Mountains. In January 2021, the Northern Horizon Express rolled through the icy expanse of Siberia's Irkutsk region, a vast, unforgiving wilderness blanketed in snow. The freight train was hauling goods across the frozen landscape with a single passenger car attached at the rear. Among the travelers was 29-year-old Elena Makarova, a teacher returning home after visiting family. She had chosen the train for its reliability, but reliability was always a gamble deep in the Siberian wilderness. As the train rounded a curve, the steel tracks beneath it groaned in protest. Freezing rain from the previous night had coated the rails in a dangerous sheet of ice. Without warning, the train lurched violently. Screeching metal and shattering glass filled the air as cars derailed one after another, crashing into the snow like fallen giants. The passenger car skidded sideways, its wheels shearing off, before slamming into a stand of trees and coming to a halt. Inside, chaos reigned. Passengers were tossed like rag dolls, colliding with walls, seats, and each other. Elena braced herself against the seat in front of her, but the force of the crash flung her sideways. Pain flared in her ribs as she landed hard against the window, which had miraculously remained intact. The world outside tilted unnaturally, the snow-covered forest illuminated by the weak glow of the train's emergency lights. When the chaos subsided, groans and cries of pain replaced the deafening noise. Dazed, Elena pulled herself upright, her hands trembling. She wasn't seriously injured, though her ribs ached and her forehead throbbed from where she'd hit it. Around her, other passengers stirred, bloodied and shaken but alive. The temperature inside the car began to plummet as cold air seeped in through shattered windows and crumpled walls. Realizing they were stranded in the middle of nowhere, the group decided to exit the wreckage to assess the situation and wait for rescuers. They stepped into the biting cold, their breaths visible in the frigid air. The scene outside was surreal. Freight cars lay scattered across the snow, their contents spilled like the guts of a gutted beast. Broken trees jutted out at odd angles, and the faint smell of diesel mingled with the crisp winter air. Elena hugged her coat tightly, shivering as she joined the others near the passenger car. Some passengers scoured the wreckage for supplies, while others attempted to build a fire with splintered wood. The vast Siberian forest loomed around them, silent and watchful. Unbeknownst to the group, the crash had shattered more than steel and glass. Deep within the forest, the noise had disturbed a Russian grizzly bear hibernating in its den. Starved and disoriented, the bear emerged from its shelter, its massive body covered in frost and clumps of dirt. The scent of humans and spilled food wafted through the cold air, drawing it toward the wreckage. The survivors were still huddled together when the first warning came, a low growl that cut through the stillness, like a knife. Heads turned, confusion giving way to alarm. From the tree line, the bear appeared, its hulking frame blending with the shadows. It moved closer, its breath visible in the freezing air, eyes locked on the group. Panic erupted. Some screamed, others froze in place, while a few bolted for the wreckage, seeking refuge. Elena was among those who hesitated, her mind struggling to process the sight of the enormous predator. The bear wasted no time, charging at the group with terrifying speed. Elena turned to run, but the snow was deep, and her boots sank with every step. Behind her, the bear roared, a sound that seemed to shake the earth. The beast closed the distance effortlessly. The woman stumbled, her foot catching on a buried piece of debris. Before she could rise, the bear was on her. Its massive paw came down, raking her back with claws as sharp as knives. Elena screamed, the pain blinding as the bear's weight pressed her into the snow. The others watched in horror from the wreckage, too afraid to act. The bear bit into her shoulder, its jaws crunching through the bones. Blood stained the snow as Elena thrashed, trying desperately to escape. She clawed at the ground, her fingers digging into the frozen earth, but it was useless. The bear's sheer strength was overwhelming. Some passengers snapped out of their paralysis, grabbing pieces of debris, metal rods, broken wood, anything they could find. They shouted and waved their makeshift weapons to scare the bear off. One man hurled a chunk of metal, striking the bear on its flank. The beast growled in anger but didn't release Elena. The attack seemed to stretch on forever, though it was only minutes. The bear, realizing its commotion, finally lifted Elena's limp body in its jaws and began dragging her toward the forest. Her blood left a stark trail in the snow. The survivors continued shouting and throwing objects, but the bear paid them little attention. It vanished into the trees, leaving behind a scene of devastation. The snow where Elena had fallen was churned and red, and the ground was littered with scraps of her torn clothing and flesh. The group stood stunned, and what had just happened was sinking in. Some wept openly, while others stared blankly at the forest, their breath in ragged gasps. Hours later, rescue teams arrived, alerted by the train's automated distress signals. They found the survivors huddled in the wreckage, their faces pale and haunted. When the rescuers learned of the bear attack, they were horrified and unsurprised. Siberia was unforgiving, its wilderness indifferent to human tragedy. Elena's body was never recovered. Search teams ventured into the forest but found no trace of her beyond the blood trail. The bear, likely retreating to another den, left the area before it could be tracked. News of the derailment and the bear attack dominated headlines for the next few weeks, sparking debates about the risks of traveling through such remote and untamed areas. For the survivors, however, the real scars were psychological. The memory of Elena's screams, the bear's savage strength, and the sight of her being dragged into the trees would haunt them for the rest of their lives. In September 2020, Steve Harper, an experienced 39-year-old hiker, embarked on a solo adventure through the dense forests of British Columbia. Known for his love of the outdoors, Steve had spent years exploring remote trails across North America, documenting his journeys and sharing them with fellow nature enthusiasts. This trip was meant to be another peaceful escape into the wilderness, offering a chance to disconnect from the noise of daily life and immerse himself in the untouched beauty of the region. Steve began his trek early in the morning, setting off along a challenging but scenic route known as the Mount Robson Trail. The path wound through towering pines, crystal-clear streams, and steep inclines, offering breathtaking views at every turn. As a seasoned adventurer, Steve carried all the essentials: a sturdy backpack filled with supplies, a first aid kit, and his trusted hiking poles. By mid-afternoon, Steve had covered significant ground, feeling both accomplished and exhilarated. At around 4 p.m., he decided to take a short break near a small clearing to catch his breath and hydrate. While resting, Steve noticed movement in the distance. A large grizzly bear emerged from the brush, its massive frame casting an imposing shadow across the forest floor. Steve froze, instinctively assessing the situation. The bear appeared to be foraging and initially showed no interest in him. Confident in his knowledge of bear behavior, Steve decided to remain calm, hoping the animal would continue on its way. After several tense minutes, the grizzly seemed to move away, disappearing into the thick undergrowth. Relieved, Steve resumed his hike, maintaining a steady pace while keeping a vigilant eye on his surroundings. However, as he navigated a narrow section of the trail, he heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footfalls behind him. Turning his head, he saw the same grizzly bear charging directly toward him. Before Steve could react, the bear slammed into him with immense force, knocking him off his feet. The impact left him dazed and disoriented as he hit the ground hard. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, he lost consciousness. When he regained awareness, the grizzly was looming over him, its sharp claws tearing into his legs and arms. The bear's powerful jaws inflicted deep wounds on Steve's limbs, leaving him bleeding profusely. Panic surged through Steve's body as he realized the severity of the attack. Summoning every ounce of strength, he reached for his hiking pole, using it as a makeshift weapon to jab at the bear. Despite the unbearable pain, Steve refused to give up, determined to survive the encounter. As the struggle continued, Steve's relentless efforts began to wear the bear down. With a final, desperate thrust of the pole, he struck the animal on its sensitive nose. The bear let out a deafening roar before retreating into the forest, leaving Steve battered and alone. Steve lay motionless on the forest floor, his breath shallow and his body trembling. The world around him felt surreal. The towering trees and dense foliage blurred as pain coursed through his body. Blood seeped from his wounds, staining the ground beneath him. Every movement sent sharp waves of agony through his legs and arms, but the will to survive pushed him to act. As the minutes stretched into an eternity, Steve managed to gather his thoughts. He needed to find help. Despite the intense pain, he focused on one goal: reaching the nearest trailhead. With great effort, he propped himself up, using his uninjured arm, and began to crawl, his movements slow and deliberate. The deep gashes on his legs and arms caused searing pain, but he knew stopping was not an option. The forest was eerily quiet now, as if holding its breath after the violent encounter. Steve's body screamed for rest, but he forced himself forward, dragging himself inch by inch. The hiking pole he had used to fend off the bear lay discarded nearby, its once sturdy frame bent from the struggle. Steve clung to it as a crutch, using it to steady himself when he could no longer crawl. Time seemed to lose meaning as he moved through the dense undergrowth. The light filtering through the trees began to fade, signaling the approach of evening. Each passing minute felt like a battle against his own limitations. The pain, exhaustion, and fear of the bear returning threatened to overwhelm him, but he clung to the hope that help was within reach. After what felt like hours, Steve spotted a break in the trees ahead. The sight of a trailhead filled him with a renewed sense of determination. He knew that this was his chance to find rescue. Summoning every last ounce of strength, he pulled himself onto the trail, leaving a faint trail of blood behind him. As he lay on the trail, unable to go further, a sound broke through the stillness. Footsteps. A passerby, another hiker returning from a long trek, emerged from the forest. The sight of Steve's battered body stopped them in their tracks. Without hesitation, they rushed to his side, assessing his injuries and offering reassurance. The hiker quickly retrieved a first aid kit and worked to stop the bleeding while calling for emergency assistance. Minutes later, the sound of helicopter blades filled the air as a rescue team arrived. The medics worked swiftly, stabilizing Steve and preparing him for airlift. The extent of his injuries included deep claw marks and bites, leaving permanent damage to his legs and arms. As he was lifted into the helicopter, Steve's mind drifted between consciousness and unconsciousness, the adrenaline finally giving way to sheer exhaustion. The journey to the hospital was a blur, but Steve's fight was far from over. The doctors worked tirelessly to save his limbs, performing multiple surgeries to repair the damage. The physical recovery was grueling, with weeks of rehabilitation and therapy ahead. Though his body began to heal, the emotional scars from the attack lingered. Steve's encounter with the bear became a cautionary tale among hikers in the region. His story was shared widely, sparking discussions about the unpredictability of wildlife and the importance of preparedness. Steve, once an avid and fearless adventurer, found himself hesitant to return to the wilderness he had loved so dearly. Despite the trauma, Steve's resilience shone through. He used his experience to educate others, sharing lessons about safety and respect for nature's power. While his body bore the lasting effects of the attack, his spirit remained unbroken, a testament to the human will to survive even in the face of nature's fiercest challenges. Helena, Montana. On the night of September 12, 2014, Rick Lawson, the owner of a popular local restaurant, was finishing up his long day. His restaurant, nestled in a cozy corner of town, was known for its hearty meals and friendly atmosphere. Rick, a hardworking man in his early 40s, had been running the place for nearly a decade. He was well liked by both his customers and his staff, always going the extra mile to ensure everyone felt welcome. After a busy day of serving meals, he stayed behind to lock up the restaurant and get ready for another day. It was late, and the streets were quiet. The cool evening air hinted at the arrival of fall. As Rick made his way to his truck, he noticed something strange: the smell of food wafting from the restaurant's kitchen. Although he had already cleaned up, some scraps had been left outside. Unknown to Rick, this scent had attracted a hungry bear that had wandered out of the nearby woods. The bear, drawn to the food, had been quietly moving closer to the restaurant. As Rick approached his truck, about to head home, he suddenly spotted the massive shape of the bear emerging from the shadows. His heart raced as he quickly honked his car horn, hoping to scare the animal away. But the bear, feeling threatened or perhaps simply more curious, wasn't frightened. Instead, it charged straight toward him with terrifying speed. Rick's instincts kicked in. He leaped into his truck, slamming the door shut behind him, but the bear was relentless. It slammed its body against the truck, its claws scraping the metal. Rick's eyes widened in fear as he realized the bear wasn't going to back off. With incredible strength, the bear ripped the door off the truck, pulling it from the frame. The vehicle rocked as the bear grabbed Rick by the arm, dragging him out of the safety of the truck. Panic surged through Rick as the bear's claws raked across his skin and its teeth sank into his flesh. Despite the pain, Rick fought back with everything he had, desperate to survive. He reached for his emergency flare gun, his hands trembling from the shock and blood loss. With a loud pop, the flare shot into the night sky, its bright light startling the bear. The bear, confused and frightened by the sudden flash, retreated, but not before leaving Rick badly injured. Rick, covered in blood and struggling to breathe, was left shaken and in shock. His survival was nothing short of a miracle. The bear, now retreating into the dark, left him alone, but the trauma of the attack lingered. Rick was rushed to the hospital where he was treated for several deep wounds. His injuries were severe but not life-threatening, and after a lengthy recovery, he eventually returned to his restaurant. However, the attack changed Rick forever. He became deeply fearful of wildlife encroaching on human spaces. What had once been a peaceful town now felt dangerous to him, and the close call made him more cautious, especially at night. The fear he experienced that evening remained with him long after the bear had been driven away. Rick's life was forever changed after the bear attack. The physical scars on his body healed over time, but the emotional impact remained. He found it hard to walk past his truck without remembering the terrifying moments when the bear had ripped the door off. The quiet streets of Helena, once comforting, now seemed full of potential dangers. Every rustle in the trees or shadow that moved too quickly made Rick's heart race, and the sight of food scraps left behind outside the restaurant always made him nervous. He began to take extra precautions to keep the area around his business clean, ensuring that there were no leftover food or anything that might attract wildlife. His recovery, both physically and emotionally, was slow. The wounds from the bear's claws and teeth took months to heal, but the mental trauma lingered much longer. Rick could no longer enjoy his nightly routine of locking up the restaurant without feeling a sense of dread. Every time he stepped outside into the quiet of the night, he was haunted by the memory of the bear's strength and the terror that had surged through him as it dragged him from the safety of his truck. Rick's story soon spread throughout Helena. It was a shocking event for the small town, where wildlife encounters were rare but not unheard of. Locals talked about the attack in hushed tones, and Rick became known as the man who survived a bear mauling. While some admired his courage, others couldn't help but wonder if something had changed in the bear's behavior. People began to ask questions about why the bear had acted so aggressively, and whether it was becoming more common for wildlife to wander closer to human settlements. The authorities conducted an investigation into the attack. They tracked the bear, and after confirming it was the same one that had attacked Rick, wildlife officials found it and killed it, deeming it a serious threat to humans. This action was met with mixed feelings in the community. While many agreed with the decision, there were also those who were upset by the death of the bear. They felt that wildlife should be protected and that the bear had simply been following its instincts. Nonetheless, the bear was removed, and the town was left to grapple with the reality that such an encounter could happen again. Rick's business suffered for a time. His employees noticed that fewer people were coming in for meals, and those who did seemed nervous, constantly looking over their shoulders as if expecting another attack. Rick understood their fears, but also knew he couldn't let them control his life. Slowly, he began to rebuild his trust in the world around him. He increased security around the restaurant and even hired a wildlife expert to educate both his staff and his customers on how to stay safe when living near the wilderness. Despite the trauma, Rick remained in Helena. He chose to continue running his restaurant, but with a heightened awareness of the dangers that nature could bring. Though he had survived the attack, the experience had changed him deeply. He no longer saw the world in the same way. Every day felt like a reminder that the line between human and wildlife territories was thinner than most people realized. But through it all, Rick found a sense of resilience. His strength was no longer just about surviving the attack. It was about moving forward, carrying the lessons he had learned, and making sure that no one else would face the same terrifying experience he had endured. December 24th, 2021, the Carter family arrived at their cozy, snow-covered cabin deep in the forests of Montana. They had chosen this remote getaway to enjoy a peaceful Christmas, surrounded by the breathtaking wilderness. Mike Carter, 45, a contractor, loved the outdoors and often organized trips like these for his family. His wife, Liz, 42, was a teacher who adored capturing moments of their adventures with her camera. Their 14-year-old daughter, Emma, was a curious and bright teenager who loved exploring new places. And the family's loyal golden retriever, Max, accompanied them on every journey. The cabin was nestled near a frozen creek, surrounded by towering pines blanketed in snow. It was the perfect holiday retreat. Mike had planned activities like building snowmen and roasting marshmallows by the fire. Liz was excited to bake cookies with Emma in the small but functional kitchen, while Max, wagging his tail, was eager to explore the snowy outdoors. The first day went by peacefully. The family decorated the cabin with lights and ornaments they had brought from home, and Emma insisted on hanging stockings over the fireplace. Max enjoyed running in the snow, chasing after Emma as she laughed. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the temperature dropped sharply, and the family settled inside the warm cabin. They enjoyed hot cocoa and played board games, their laughter echoing through the wooden walls. On Christmas Eve, a cold wind howled through the forest as the family prepared for bed. Around 11 p.m., a loud crash shattered the stillness of the night. Max barked furiously, his growls directed toward the door. Startled, Mike grabbed a flashlight and Liz joined him, holding Max's leash tightly. Emma peeked nervously from behind her mother, her heart pounding. Mike cautiously stepped outside, his breath visible in the freezing air. The beam of his flashlight revealed their overturned cooler, its contents scattered across the snow. As he moved closer, a low growl sent shivers down his spine. From the shadows, a massive grizzly bear emerged, its fur bristling and its eyes locked on Mike. The family froze in terror as the bear roared, its powerful presence dwarfing the man. Liz screamed, pulling Emma back inside while Max barked uncontrollably, his instincts kicking in. Before Mike could retreat, the bear charged, slamming into him with incredible force and sending him flying across the yard. Mike suffered severe injuries as the bear mauled him, slashing his chest and throwing him into the snow. Liz, trembling and desperate, grabbed the rifle they had kept in the cabin for emergencies. Her hands shook as she tried to aim at the bear. Meanwhile, Emma dialed 911 on her phone, her voice breaking as she reported the attack. Max continued barking, his fearless attempts to distract the bear, finally succeeding. The bear, irritated, turned its attention to the noise. It swiped at Max, but eventually backed off, retreating into the dark woods. Liz rushed to Mike, who lay motionless in the snow, his face pale. The chaos had left the family shaken to their core, and the long wait for help began. They huddled together, tending to Mike as best as they could while praying for rescue. Liz held Mike tightly, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding from his wounds. The snow around them was stained with red, and the cold only made his condition worse. She wrapped a thick blanket around him, hoping to keep him warm until help arrived. Max stood nearby, growling into the darkness, his protective instincts still on high alert. Emma, shaken but determined, stayed by the door, watching for any sign of the rescue team. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Liz felt a wave of relief, but knew they still had to keep Mike stable. She tore strips from a spare blanket to use as makeshift bandages, wrapping them tightly around his chest and arms to slow the bleeding. Mike's breaths were shallow, his face pale, but he managed to stay conscious. When the emergency responders arrived, they quickly assessed the situation. The paramedics worked swiftly, placing Mike on a stretcher and securing him for transport. His condition was critical, and every moment counted. Liz and Emma were allowed to ride with him in the ambulance, while Max stayed behind with one of the responders, who promised to keep him safe. The journey to the hospital felt endless. Liz gripped Emma's hand tightly, whispering words of comfort as they watched the paramedics administer oxygen and monitor Mike's vitals. By the time they reached the hospital, a team of doctors and nurses was waiting, ready to begin life-saving procedures. The hours that followed were filled with anxiety. Liz and Emma sat in the waiting room, their hearts heavy with worry. They could hear the faint sounds of machines and hurried footsteps beyond the closed doors, each sound a reminder of the fragile situation. When the doctor finally came out, his expression was serious but hopeful. Mike had survived surgery, but his injuries were severe. Mike suffered broken ribs, deep lacerations on his chest and arms, and significant blood loss. His recovery would be long and challenging, both physically and emotionally. The next few weeks were a blur for the Carter family. Mike remained in the hospital, undergoing multiple surgeries and physical therapy sessions. Liz and Emma visited him every day, bringing cards and messages of support from friends and family. Max was reunited with them, his tail wagging furiously as he greeted Mike with a gentle nuzzle. The attack left a lasting impact on the Carters. Mike's once adventurous spirit was dimmed, replaced by caution and a sense of vulnerability. Liz struggled with nightmares about that night, often waking up in tears. Emma found herself more protective of her family, her youthful sense of invincibility shattered. Despite the hardships, the Carters found strength in each other. They began attending support groups for survivors of wildlife encounters, sharing their story and listening to others who had faced similar experiences. Mike's progress in physical therapy was slow but steady, with each small victory celebrated as a family. The cabin in Montana remained untouched, a haunting reminder of the terrifying night. The Carters decided never to return, choosing instead to spend future holidays closer to home. They installed security systems and took self-defense classes, determined to feel safe again. The attack also spurred changes in the local community. The incident was widely reported, leading to increased awareness about the dangers of human-wildlife interactions. Local authorities implemented stricter guidelines for food storage and camp safety, hoping to prevent similar tragedies. For the Carters, the scars of that night would always remain, but so would their resilience. They had faced the unimaginable and survived, bound together by love and the determination to move forward. Their story became a symbol of courage and survival, inspiring others to respect nature's power and cherish the moments they had with their loved ones. It was October 2019, and the air in the remote Siberian village of Ust-Kut was crisp with the first bite of winter. That day, the villagers gathered for their small autumn festival, a cherished tradition. Children ran between makeshift stalls selling warm pastries and handmade trinkets, while the adults laughed and chattered despite the cold air. Soon enough, it would be winter, and there wouldn't be as many occasions for the villagers to celebrate. But danger lurked just beyond the edge of town, hidden in the thick forest that bordered the village. Hunger gnawed at the belly of a massive Russian grizzly bear, its hulking frame covered in a matted coat that barely concealed its ribs. The scarcity of food had driven the beast closer to human settlements. The scent of roasted meat and sweet pastries wafting from the festival proved too appealing to resist. Then suddenly, the village dogs started barking. Their desperate yelps cut through the festive atmosphere, drawing nervous glances from the villagers. Then came the growls, a deep sound that silenced the crowd. Heads turned toward the woods, where the massive grizzly emerged like a nightmare from the shadows. The bear stood over 7 feet tall on its hind legs, its yellowed fangs bared and its black eyes glinting with predatory focus. For a moment, the villagers froze. Living in a remote Siberian village, they were used to wildlife, but it was usual for a bear to come that close to a noisy gathering. Chaos erupted. Mothers grabbed their children and bolted toward the safety of nearby buildings. Stalls were abandoned, the contents spilling onto the ground as the crowd scattered in panic. Senior police officer Ivan Kuznetsov had been leaning against his patrol car, sipping from a cup of tea, when the commotion began. At 42, Ivan was a seasoned officer who had seen his share of danger, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight of the charging grizzly. The bear's sheer size and speed were astonishing, its powerful limbs tearing through the festival grounds like a force of nature. Instinct took over. Ivan tossed aside his cup and sprinted toward the chaos, his hand reaching for the pistol holstered at his hip. The villagers screamed his name, begging him to run, but Ivan knew he couldn't. The bear was heading straight for a cluster of children huddled near a toppled stall, their wide eyes filled with terror. Ivan's boots pounded against the frozen earth as he closed the distance. He drew his pistol, the weapon's weight familiar and reassuring in his grip, and raised it. The first shot rang out, and the bullet struck the bear's shoulder, jerking its massive frame to the side. The beast roared in pain, a horrible sound that shook Ivan. He fired again, and this time, the shot grazed the bear's flank, drawing blood but failing to stop its advance. The bear turned its attention from the children to Ivan, the source of its pain. Lowering its head, it charged with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. Ivan barely had time to react. He fired 2 more shots, but the bullet seemed to do little more than enrage the beast further. Its thick hide and layers of muscle absorbed the impact, the blood dripping from its wounds only fueling its fury. As the bear closed in, Ivan reached for his baton, his pistol now useless with no time to reload. The beast reared up on its hind legs, towering over him, its claws slicing through the air. Ivan swung the baton with all his strength, landing a blow against the bear's muzzle. The strike wasn't enough to stop the inevitable. The bear's paw came down with devastating force. The claws, each as long as a dagger, tore through Ivan's neck in a single swipe. His head separated from his body in an instant, blood spraying in an arc that painted the ground red. The crowd's collective gasp turned into a chorus of screams as Ivan's lifeless body crumpled to the ground, his sacrifice a horrific spectacle. The bear didn't stop. It stood over Ivan's body and roared. For a moment, it seemed that the nightmare would never end, the animal's dark eyes scanning the crowd for its next victim. But then something changed. Perhaps it was the realization that the threat had been destroyed, or maybe the noise finally overwhelmed the creature's senses. Whatever the reason, the bear backed away slowly, dragging its injured body toward the square's edge. The villagers held their breath, too afraid to move, as the beast disappeared into the forest, leaving a trail of blood in its wake. In the aftermath, the square was eerily silent. The villagers remained rooted in place, their eyes fixed on Ivan's mangled body. The man who had stood between them and certain death was gone, torn apart under their own eyes. When authorities arrived, they found a village in shock, its people haunted by what they had witnessed. Even Kuznetsov's body was retrieved with solemn care, his blood-stained uniform a grim reminder of his sacrifice. The bear was later tracked and killed by a team of hunters, and its body was examined to reveal the depths of its starvation. The villagers found little comfort in its death. The autumn festival, once a cherished tradition, became a symbol of tragedy, a day forever marked by the loss of a hero. In the following weeks, the people of Ust-Kut erected a small memorial in the town square, a plaque bearing Ivan Kuznetsov's name and a simple message of thanks. But no monument could erase the trauma or the fear that lingered. In June 2022, Brian Harper, 32, and his longtime friend Jason Mills, 34, set out for a fishing trip in the tranquil wilderness of Idaho. The two friends, seasoned anglers, had planned this trip to escape their hectic lives in Boise. Brian, a software engineer, often sought solace in nature, while Jason, a firefighter, loved the thrill of outdoor adventures. They chose a remote riverbank along the Salmon River, renowned for its serene beauty and abundant fish. The morning was perfect. The sun filtered through the towering pine trees, casting shimmering patterns on the water. By 10 a.m., Brian and Jason had set up their gear near a secluded spot. They laughed and reminisced as the cool breeze carried the sound of the gurgling river. The trip was shaping up to be exactly what they had envisioned: peaceful and refreshing. As they reeled in their catches, the distinct scent of freshly caught fish filled the air. Unbeknownst to them, the smell was also attracting unwanted attention. Brian noticed movement in the dense undergrowth nearby. Thinking it might be a deer, he pointed it out to Jason. Moments later, a massive grizzly bear emerged, its size and presence immediately silencing their laughter. The bear stood on its hind legs, sniffing the air, its focus shifting toward the fish they had caught. Jason whispered for Brian to stay calm as they began to back away slowly, leaving their gear behind. Despite their cautious retreat, the bear's demeanor changed. It dropped onto all fours, letting out a guttural growl that echoed through the wilderness. The grizzly charged. In a frantic attempt to create distance, Jason lost his footing and fell into the river. The current carried him downstream as Brian screamed his name. The bear, undeterred, turned its attention to Brian. With no weapon to defend himself, Brian grabbed his fishing rod and swung it in desperation. The bear swatted the rod away with a single powerful blow, sending Brian sprawling onto the rocky bank. The bear loomed over him, its eyes wild and teeth bared. Brian scrambled backward, his heart pounding as he searched for anything to shield himself. The attack was swift and brutal. The bear struck him across the chest, knocking him unconscious. Brian was left with severe injuries from the attack, including deep lacerations and broken ribs. The bear had struck with terrifying force, and for a brief moment, Brian lay unconscious on the riverbank. When he slowly regained consciousness, the first thing he noticed was the blood soaking into his clothes. His chest and legs were covered in deep gashes from the bear's claws. The pain was overwhelming, and his head spun as he struggled to stay alert. He realized with horror that Jason was nowhere in sight. Panic surged through him, but he fought it back, knowing that he needed to focus on surviving. Brian's heart pounded in his chest as he took in his surroundings. The bear had retreated, but it was not gone for good. He could hear its heavy steps in the distance, and he knew that if it decided to return, he would be in no condition to defend himself. Blood continued to pour from his wounds, and the pain intensified with each breath. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him, weakened by the attack. Despite this, Brian pushed himself forward, inching toward the trailhead where he hoped to find help. As Brian struggled to move, the pain from his injuries became almost unbearable. His vision blurred, and his strength waned. He knew he had to keep going, but every step felt like it was pushing him closer to collapse. In the distance, he could hear the sound of rushing water and the occasional call of a bird. He knew the trailhead was nearby, but it felt impossibly far away. After what felt like hours, Brian finally saw movement. A figure appeared walking along the trail. It was another hiker, and Brian's relief was immediate. The hiker approached quickly, noticing the blood-soaked shirt and the injured man on the ground. Without wasting any time, the hiker called for help, staying with Brian as he tried to keep him awake and alert. Rescuers soon arrived, bringing first aid supplies and medical equipment. They carefully lifted Brian onto a stretcher, securing him for the trip to the hospital. Despite the heavy pain and exhaustion, Brian managed to stay conscious long enough to be airlifted to safety. He was rushed to the nearest hospital where doctors immediately began to treat his injuries. The attack had left Brian with extensive wounds. His chest and legs were covered in deep lacerations, and his ribs were broken in several places. The physical scars would take months to heal, but it was the emotional trauma that would leave a lasting mark. The memory of the bear's attack and of seeing Jason being dragged away haunted Brian's thoughts every day. As for Jason, the search for him began as soon as Brian was safely in the hands of medical professionals. Rescue teams scoured the area, but it was days before Jason's body was found downstream. The river had carried him far, and by the time the team discovered his remains, it was too late. The attack had claimed Jason's life, leaving Brian devastated by the loss of his close friend. In the aftermath of the attack, authorities in Idaho tightened safety measures in the area, warning hikers and campers about the risks of encountering bears. The tragedy also sparked a renewed focus on bear safety education, emphasizing the importance of maintaining distance from wildlife, especially in areas known to be frequented by large predators like grizzly bears. For Brian, the road to recovery was long. He faced months of physical therapy to regain strength and mobility, but the emotional scars remained. He could no longer bring himself to venture into the wilderness, where the memory of the bear and his friend's death loomed large. Though he had survived the attack, the experience had changed him forever. 2010, on a cool morning in the dense forests of British Columbia, Canada, Emily Dawson was out for her regular run. She was a seasoned marathoner, known for her speed, endurance, and determination. Emily had been training for years, running in all sorts of conditions, but this particular day would test her in ways she had never imagined. Born and raised in Vancouver, Emily had always been active. From a young age, she loved running and joined local competitions. As she grew older, her passion for marathon running only increased. Over the years, she had participated in numerous races, always finishing with strong times. Her training regimen was intense, and she often ran in remote areas to challenge herself and to escape the busyness of city life. The forests of British Columbia, with their lush greenery and quiet trails, were one of her favorite places to train. She often ran alone, feeling at peace in the natural surroundings, where she could focus solely on her pace and endurance. On that particular morning in 2010, Emily was running on a narrow, winding trail that cut through a thick fog. The mist hung heavily in the air, making it hard to see far ahead. The forest seemed eerily quiet, and the usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves were drowned out by the thick, gray fog. Emily, however, was used to this. She had run in various weather conditions, and fog didn't bother her much. She was focused on keeping a steady pace, her eyes fixed on the trail ahead. The cool air and the soft sound of her footsteps made her feel alive. What Emily didn't know was that she wasn't alone. Just behind her, a grizzly bear had recently become habituated to humans in the area. The bear had been drawn by the sounds of her running and had been following her for some time. At first, the bear kept its distance, curious about this fast-moving creature. The grizzly, used to humans passing through its territory, didn't immediately view Emily as a threat. But as Emily picked up speed, the bear grew more interested, sensing movement that caught its attention. It wasn't until Emily noticed the bear's presence that the situation began to change. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the mist, but soon she realized that the sound of heavy footsteps behind her wasn't just the wind. The bear was gaining on her. Panic surged through her. She tried to increase her speed, but the fog made it difficult to see the path ahead, and she stumbled over a loose rock. This gave the bear the opening it needed. The grizzly, sensing its chance, charged at Emily with terrifying speed. She had no time to react. As the bear came closer, Emily knew she had to think fast. She remembered advice she had heard about how to deal with bear encounters. In her last-ditch effort to save herself, Emily quickly dropped to the ground and played dead. She lay still, hoping the bear would lose interest and walk away. The seconds felt like hours as she tried to remain calm, not moving a muscle. The bear sniffed her, and for a few moments it seemed unsure of what to do. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the grizzly eventually lost interest and retreated into the fog, leaving Emily lying on the ground, battered but alive. Emily lay on the ground for a few moments, still unsure if the bear had truly gone. The mist still lingered heavily around her, but the sound of the bear's heavy footsteps faded into the distance. Slowly, she lifted her head and scanned the area, her heart still racing. The bear was nowhere to be seen. It had left, but Emily knew she couldn't let her guard down just yet. The fear and adrenaline that coursed through her body were overwhelming. Her legs felt weak as she pushed herself up. Scratches and bruises covered her arms and legs, reminders of her frantic fall during the chase. Her breathing was ragged, and her body ached from the strain of the encounter. As she stood up, she realized just how close she had come to disaster. A moment of hesitation or a wrong move could have meant a very different outcome. She took several deep breaths, trying to calm herself and regain some sense of control. She knew she had to get out of the forest as quickly as possible. The bear could return at any time, and she wasn't willing to take that risk again. As she started to walk, she noticed the fog was still thick around her, but now it felt like a cold, suffocating weight. The quiet of the forest, once peaceful and calming, now felt oppressive. Emily's mind raced with thoughts of what had just happened. It was something she had never imagined during her years of running. She had trained in many different places, but nothing had prepared her for a dangerous encounter like this. Every step felt harder than the last. Emily's body was in shock, and the fear still gripped her, making it difficult to focus on the path ahead. She stumbled a few times but managed to keep moving. As the minutes passed, the adrenaline began to wear off and the full weight of the experience began to set in. Her legs were shaking and the scratches on her body stung with every movement. Eventually, she reached the edge of the forest where the trail met a clearing. The sunlight pierced through the fog, making it easier to see. Emily felt a slight sense of relief, but the fear still lingered in the back of her mind. She had made it out, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the bear was still out there, watching her from the shadows. Her training had taught her how to handle difficult runs, but it hadn't prepared her for the reality of encountering a bear in the wild. As she made her way back to her car, the experience changed something inside her. Emily had always been a confident runner, used to pushing her limits and overcoming challenges. But this encounter with the bear was different. It wasn't just physical strength or speed that had saved her. It was her knowledge of wildlife and her ability to stay calm under pressure. However, the fear she had felt would not easily fade. The encounter left a mark on her, both physically and mentally. She would never run through those forests in the same way again. The experience had taught her about the unpredictable nature of wildlife and how quickly a peaceful run could turn into a life-threatening situation. Emily continued with her training, but the shadow of the bear would remain with her, always in the back of her mind as she ran through the forests of British Columbia. The close call had changed her view of nature, making her more aware of the dangers that could be lurking just beyond the trail. The Siberian wilderness in January is a place of profound stillness where the frozen expanse stretches endlessly, interrupted only by patches of dense forest and the occasional rugged outcrop. The snow-covered terrain, glittering under a pale sun, hides a dangerous secret. It is home to the Russian grizzly bear, a creature as majestic as it is deadly. On January 9th, 2025, a team of 7 wildlife officers experienced in managing these powerful animals ventured into this forbidding landscape on a routine relocation mission. What unfolded that day would forever change the way such operations were conducted. The group, led by Ivan Tikhonov, a seasoned officer with over a decade of experience in wildlife management, included Viktor Gorsky, a tranquilizer specialist, Alexei Petrov, a logistics coordinator, Dmitry Sorokin, a veterinarian, Yuri Karpov, a tracker, Pavel Mikhailov, a driver, and Andrei Volkov, the youngest of the team, eager to prove himself. Their task was straightforward yet dangerous: relocate a Russian grizzly bear that had wandered too close to human settlements. The bear had recently been spotted near the outskirts of a small Siberian village, scavenging for food, its natural habitat likely disturbed by illegal logging. The officers traveled in 2 sturdy vehicles, equipped with tranquilizer guns, safety equipment, and a reinforced cage for transporting the bear. They arrived at the forest's edge in the early morning, the air biting and heavy with the promise of snow. The officers parked their vehicles safely from the bear's den, relying on Yuri's tracking skills to lead them to the site. The plan was to tranquilize the bear, secure it in the transport cage, and release it in a remote area far from human activity. The den was nestled in a thicket of trees, partially hidden by snow and undergrowth. The officers moved cautiously, their breaths visible in the frigid air, their boots crunching softly against the snow. Ivan instructed the team to spread out, positioning themselves strategically to block the bear's escape routes. The atmosphere was tense but focused. They had done this many times before. As the group prepared their equipment, Pavel, distracted by a crackling message on the radio, accidentally left the driver's door of one vehicle ajar. It was a small oversight, but one with catastrophic consequences. Unbeknownst to the team, the bear, already on edge from the commotion near its den, had been watching them. Drawn by the scent of food left in the vehicle, it emerged suddenly from the thicket, a massive, hulking figure against the snowy backdrop. The first officer to notice the bear was Victor, who warned the others. The bear, agitated and aggressive, charged directly toward the open vehicle. The team scrambled to deploy their tranquilizers, but the situation rapidly descended into chaos. The bear's sheer speed and ferocity caught them off guard. Before anyone could react, it reached the vehicle, its powerful claws ripping through the seats as it searched for the source of the scent. Pavel, attempting to retrieve the tranquilizer gun from the back of the vehicle, became the bear's first target. The animal lunged at him, its massive jaws clamping down on his shoulder, dragging him to the ground. The team, horrified but determined, tried to intervene. Ivan and Victor fired tranquilizer darts, but the thick fur and adrenaline-fueled rage of the bear rendered the initial doses ineffective. Alexei and Dmitry rushed to assist Pavel, but the bear swiped at them with terrifying force, its claws tearing through their protective clothing. The clearing erupted into a frenzy of shouts and growls. The snow stained crimson as the bear turned its attention to the remaining officers. Yuri and Andrei, positioned farther from the vehicle, attempted to flank the animal, hoping to draw it away from their fallen comrades. Andrei, armed with a tranquilizer gun, managed to land a shot on the bear's flank, but it only seemed to enrage the creature further. The bear charged at him, knocking him to the ground before Yuri could react. Seeing his team overwhelmed, Ivan shouted orders to regroup, but the bear's ferocity left little room for coordination. One by one, the officers fell, their attempts to subdue the animal futile against its raw power. The bear, its primal instincts fully awakened, delivered swift and devastating blows, leaving no chance for survival. The attack lasted mere minutes but felt like an eternity. When the bear finally retreated into the dense forest, the clearing was silent, save for the wind and the soft patter of falling snow. The 7 officers' bodies lay scattered, their equipment broken, and their mission tragically unfinished. A search team discovered the scene hours later, sending shockwaves through Russia's wildlife management community. The scale of the tragedy was unprecedented, raising urgent questions about the safety protocols for handling dangerous predators in remote regions. Investigators determined that the bear's heightened aggression was likely due to its disrupted habitat and the stress of human intrusion near its den. The open vehicle door and the scent of food only exacerbated the situation, creating a perfect storm of circumstances that led to the attack. The loss of Ivan, Victor, Alexei, Dmitry, Yuri, Pavel, and Andrei devastated their families, colleagues, and the broader conservation community. Vigils were held in their honor, and their names became a solemn reminder of the risks faced by those who work to protect and manage wildlife. The incident spurred significant changes in safety protocols, including mandatory double checks of all vehicles and equipment, increased use of remote tranquilizer delivery systems, and enhanced training for officers on handling high-stress encounters with predators. In the aftermath, the bear was not pursued. Wildlife experts argued that the attack was not the result of malice, but rather a tragic intersection of human error and instinct. The forest, as unforgiving as it is beautiful, had simply reminded humanity of its place in the natural order. Though tragic, the deaths of the 7 officers led to greater awareness and improvements in how dangerous predators were managed, ensuring that their sacrifice was not in vain. November 5th, 2019. 2 experienced hunters, Tom and Mike, found themselves in the vast and unforgiving wilderness of Alberta, Canada. The pair were seasoned outdoorsmen, well accustomed to the harsh conditions of the forest, and had been working together for years. They were in the middle of setting traps for game when the unexpected happened. The quiet of the wilderness was broken by the sound of leaves rustling, followed by the heavy footfalls of an animal moving through the trees. Before either Tom or Mike could react, a large grizzly bear emerged from the brush, clearly startled by the presence of the men. Tom and Mike, who had spent countless hours hunting in the wilderness, were not easily startled. They had encountered wildlife before, but nothing prepared them for the sheer size and aggression of the grizzly. The bear, sensing danger and feeling threatened, immediately charged at them. Mike, reacting quickly, attempted to flee, his heart pounding as the massive bear sprinted toward him. He tried to make his way through the thick underbrush, hoping to outrun the predator, but the bear was too fast. In an instant, it caught up with him, knocking him to the ground. The bear then began mauling him, tearing into his flesh with its sharp claws and powerful jaws. Mike struggled to break free, but the grizzly's strength was overwhelming. Tom, witnessing the brutal attack, quickly reached for his rifle, but as his fingers fumbled in panic, his rifle jammed, rendering it useless in the face of the bear's onslaught. Tom realized that he was on his own. The bear, now enraged and undeterred by Mike's attempt to escape, turned its attention to him. Tom tried to retreat, but the grizzly was too quick. It charged at him, knocking him to the ground with terrifying force. The bear's jaws clamped down on Tom's abdomen, and it began to tear into his flesh, each strike sending waves of pain through his body. Tom tried to fight back, but his strength was fading fast. Mike, badly injured and in immense pain, managed to crawl away, dragging himself through the dense foliage in a desperate attempt to escape. But it was too late. The bear had already claimed both men. Their bodies were discovered days later, lifeless and torn apart by the ferocious attack. The authorities were called in to investigate, and after tracking the bear to its location, they killed it, deeming it a public danger. The deaths of Tom and Mike shocked the tight-knit hunting community in Alberta, and the news spread quickly, leaving the town in mourning. The attack served as a stark reminder of how unpredictable and dangerous wildlife could be, even for those with years of experience in the wilderness. The news of Tom and Mike's death spread quickly, leaving the entire community in shock. Both men had been well known in the area, not only for their skills as hunters, but also for their friendly and helpful nature. The people in the small town where they lived mourned the loss of 2 respected members of their community. The attack was hard to believe, as many had always thought of grizzly bears as more elusive and peaceful creatures. No one had expected such a deadly encounter to occur so close to home. The authorities took immediate action following the tragic deaths. Wildlife officials, alongside local law enforcement, began investigating the circumstances of the attack. They quickly set out to track the bear responsible, using the evidence from the scene of the attack. The authorities knew that the grizzly bear had to be located and dealt with, as it was deemed a serious threat to the safety of the public. The bear was tracked through the wilderness, and after a few days it was found and killed. The death of the bear sparked a debate in the community. Some people felt that the bear had simply been acting out of instinct, while others were angry that the bear had been killed. They argued that it was a tragedy for both the hunters and the bear. However, most agreed that the safety of humans had to come first. The bear's actions had shown that it was a danger to people, and it had to be removed to prevent further attacks. In the aftermath of the attack, the local authorities reassessed their wildlife safety protocols. They began taking extra precautions to protect hunters, hikers, and others who ventured into the wilderness. New signs were put up in popular areas, warning people about the potential dangers of wildlife, especially grizzly bears. The authorities also worked to educate the public on how to react if they encountered a bear, and they increased the presence of wildlife officers in the area. For the families of Tom and Mike, the grief was overwhelming. They had lost two men who were loved and respected by everyone around them. The tragedy affected not just their families, but also the entire community. Many of the locals knew that it was impossible to predict the behavior of wildlife, but the attack left them questioning how safe they truly were in the wilderness they had long trusted. The loss was deeply felt by all, and the memory of Tom and Mike lived on in the hearts of the people who knew them best. The bear attack became a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of the wild. It showed just how quickly things could turn dangerous, even for experienced hunters. The deaths of Tom and Mike served as a tragic lesson that while the wilderness can be beautiful, it can also be deadly, and respect for wildlife is always necessary. The early summer morning of June 18, 2015, dawned clear and cool in the rugged wilderness of Wyoming. Kevin Harris, a 32-year-old outdoor enthusiast, had set out for a solo ride on one of the state's most popular off-road trails. Known as Teton's Crest, the trail snaked through dense forests, rocky outcrops, and steep descents, offering challenge and exhilaration to mountain bikers. Kevin was no stranger to the wild. He had ridden these trails many times before, confident in his skills and familiarity with the terrain. But the wilderness, unpredictable and indifferent, had its plans that day. Kevin pedaled hard as the trail wound through groves of pine and aspen trees. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, birds chirping, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. He relished the solitude, the rhythmic hum of his tires on the dirt path, and the adrenaline from navigating sharp turns and steep drops. Teton's Crest was notorious for its technical sections, but it was also beloved for its isolation, cutting deep through bear country. Riders were warned to carry bear spray and make noise on the trails, but Kevin had opted to travel light, eager for speed. As he rounded a bend, the trail began a sharp descent, narrow and hemmed in by thick underbrush. Kevin leaned forward, his tires kicking up dirt and small stones, the wind rushing past his face. He felt the familiar thrill of control balanced on the edge of chaos. But as he hurtled downhill, the dense forest ahead seemed to shift unnaturally, and he saw a massive figure moving through the undergrowth. Before he could react, a grizzly bear emerged onto the trail, no more than 20 feet ahead. It was enormous, its shaggy brown fur bristling as it turned to face him. The bear's dark eyes locked onto Kevin, and it rose slightly on its hind legs. Its presence was unmistakably dominant and territorial. Time seemed to slow as Kevin registered the situation. He had accidentally crossed paths with one of nature's most formidable predators, and there was no time to stop. The bear dropped to all fours and charged. Kevin's instincts took over. He leaned into his handlebars and pedaled furiously, pushing his bike to its limits as he tried to outpace the bear. The grizzly, however, was faster than he had imagined. Its powerful strides sent dirt and debris flying as it closed the distance. The ground trembled under the weight of the animal's pursuit, and Kevin could hear its labored breaths and guttural growls growing louder behind him. The narrow path, littered with roots and loose rocks, left little room for error. Kevin swerved around a jagged boulder, his heart pounding as the bear's shadow loomed behind him. Desperation fueled his speed, but the uneven terrain conspired against him. His front tire struck a hidden root as he rounded another sharp turn, sending him careening off balance. Instantly, Kevin collided with a tree, the impact of which was throwing him off his bike and onto the forest floor. Dazed and disoriented, Kevin barely had time to register the pain in his shoulder and side before the bear was upon him. It roared, swiping at him with claws like hooked knives, tearing through the sleeve of his jersey and raking deep gashes into his arm. Kevin scrambled backward, his hands searching for anything to defend himself. His fingers found the frame of his bike, and he seized it, using it as a makeshift shield. The bear lunged again, claws clanging against the metal frame as Kevin pressed it between them. Frustrated by the obstruction, the grizzly swiped at the bike with enough force to bend the front wheel. Kevin used the momentary distraction to crawl backward, his injured arm throbbing as he struggled to put distance between himself and the animal. The bear charged again, its jaws snapping shut just inches from his leg. With adrenaline, Kevin swung the bike frame at the bear, the movement awkward but desperate. The impact startled the bear, and it hesitated, growling low as it eyed him. Seizing the opportunity, Kevin dragged himself to his feet, clutching the bike frame like a lifeline. His injured arm hung uselessly at his side, blood dripping onto the forest floor. The bear huffed, its ears twitching as it seemed to weigh the effort of continuing the attack. Finally, with a final growl, the animal turned and retreated into the underbrush, leaving Kevin alone in the aftermath. Kevin stood trembling, his breaths ragged as the forest fell eerily silent around him. His legs felt like lead, but he forced himself to move, knowing he needed to find help. With his bike damaged beyond use, he abandoned it and began the grueling journey on foot. Every step sent waves of pain through his body, but he pressed on, driven by the primal need to survive. Hours later, Kevin stumbled onto a nearby trailhead, his vision blurred and his strength fading. A group of hikers found him collapsed on the ground, bloodied and barely conscious. They called for help, and Kevin was airlifted to the nearest hospital, where he underwent surgery to repair the deep lacerations on his arm and shoulder. Doctors marveled at his resilience, noting that his quick thinking and use of the bike frame had likely saved his life. The attack left Kevin with physical scars that would never fully fade, but the emotional toll was just as significant. He struggled with nightmares and a heightened sense of vulnerability in the months that followed. However, Kevin refused to let the experience define him solely as a victim. Instead, he advocated for trail safety, sharing his story to raise awareness about biking risks in bear country. Through public talks and collaborations with local organizations, Kevin pushed for more bear-friendly trail designs, including better signage, the installation of bear-proof food storage, and education campaigns about wildlife encounters. His efforts sparked meaningful changes, with new measures implemented across popular trails in Wyoming to reduce the likelihood of similar incidents. Looking back on that fateful day, Kevin often reflected on the delicate balance between humans and nature. The wilderness, he realized, was neither cruel nor kind. It simply was. His encounter with the grizzly had been a stark reminder of the power and unpredictability of the natural world, and it left him with a profound respect for the creatures that called it home. June 2021. Liam Carter and Owen Brooks, lifelong friends, set off into a wilderness in the northern Rocky Mountains, spanning parts of south-central Montana and northwestern Wyoming. Their packs were loaded with camping gear and food. The plan was simple: 3 days of hiking, fishing, and stargazing under the pristine Montana sky. It was meant to be a break from the grind of their everyday lives, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. Neither could have imagined how their journey would end. On the second afternoon of the journey, the trail they were walking on narrowed as it wound along a steep ridgeline. The forest closed tightly on either side, the dense canopy blocking sunlight. They moved in single file, Liam in the lead. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and the faint rot of something decomposing. Liam paused, his boots scuffing against a rock as he sniffed the air. He felt uneasy, his usual enthusiasm silenced by a bad feeling Liam couldn't quite explain. Owen followed his eyes on the dirt trail. He carried a rifle over his shoulder, a much-needed precaution in grizzly country. Owen wasn't much of a hunter, but the weapon had given them both a sense of security when they planned the trip. The tension broke in an instant. Around the next bend, the source of the rancid smell came into view. A mangled elk carcass, its ribcage jutting out. Flies buzzed in a frenzied cloud. It was a grotesque sight, but it wasn't the carcass that stopped them cold. It was the massive grizzly crouched over it, its jaws slick with blood, and its head snapping up at the sound of their approach. The bear's eyes locked onto them, black and shining with an intensity that froze the two men in place. For a brief moment, the world went silent, save for the low rumble that began deep in the bear's chest. Liam's breath caught. His legs refused to move. Then the bear charged. It moved easily, its muscles rippling beneath its dense fur as it thundered toward them. Liam shouted something incoherent, his voice rising in panic. He stumbled backward, but his boot caught a rock, and he fell hard onto the trail. Pain shot up his wrist as he instinctively threw his hands out to break his fall. The bear was on him in seconds. Owen, still standing a few feet behind, froze. His hands trembled as he reached for the rifle slung over his shoulder, but his fingers fumbled with the strap, his mind screaming to act or do something. The grizzly's roar shattered his resolve. The bear lunged at Liam, its jaws wide and teeth glistening. Liam kicked out desperately, his boot connecting with its snout. The bear recoiled slightly, shaking its massive head, then returned with a swipe of its paw. The force of the blow slammed into Liam's chest, tearing through his shirt and flesh like paper. Blood sprayed across the dirt trail, staining the earth dark. Liam screamed, the sound raw and primal, filled with a terror Owen had never heard before. Liam cried, begging his friend to help him. But Owen backed away. His heart thundered in his chest, his vision tunneling as adrenaline surged through his veins. The rifle slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the rocks below. His feet moved before he could think, carrying him off the trail and into the dense forest. Branches whipped at his face, and the sound of Liam's screams faded behind him. Liam fought with everything he had. He swung his arms, aiming punches at the bear's face, eyes, and nose. The bear responded with another swipe, this time catching Liam's arm. The bone snapped with a sickening crack, and his arm went limp. He screamed again, his voice hoarse, but there was no one to hear him now. The bear's jaws clamped down on his shoulder, its teeth sinking into muscle and bone. Liam's body was jerked violently as the bear shook him like a rag doll. He tried to think, to find a way to escape, but deep down he knew it was no use. The bear released him briefly, standing over his broken body. Blood poured from the gashes on Liam's chest and arm, pooling beneath him. His breaths came in shallow gasps, his vision blurring as shock set in. The bear growled low, then bit down on his neck. This time, the fight left Liam completely. When the bear finally retreated, dragging the elk carcass back into the underbrush, Liam's body lay motionless on the trail, the ground around him soaked with blood. The forest was silent again, as though nothing had happened. Owen ran until his legs gave out. He collapsed beneath a tree, his chest heaving and his hands shaking uncontrollably. The rifle was gone, left somewhere back on the trail. His thoughts were a chaotic mess of guilt, terror, and self-preservation. He told himself there was nothing he could have done, that the bear was unstoppable, that Liam's fate had been sealed when they stumbled into its territory. But deep down, he knew the truth. Days later, a search and rescue team found Owen wandering near a trailhead, dehydrated and disoriented. He told them he had been separated from Liam, that the bear had come out of nowhere and attacked before he could react. He said he had tried to help, but had been forced to flee when the bear turned on him. The rescuers found Liam's body the next day. The scene they described to authorities painted a grim picture of a desperate struggle and a brutal death. But the details didn't align with Owen's story. The rifle, found discarded in the bushes, hadn't been fired. The footprints on the trail showed no sign of a fight from anyone but Liam. When the truth came out, the reaction in their hometown was swift and unforgiving. Liam's family, devastated by the loss of their son, publicly condemned Owen for his cowardice. Friends who had once admired Owen now avoided him, their faces cold and unforgiving. Owen moved away within weeks, unable to bear the weight of the stares, the whispers, the accusations. But no matter how far he ran, he couldn't escape the image of Liam's bloodied body or the sound of his screams echoing through the forest. The memory clung to him like a shadow, a constant reminder of the friend he had abandoned, and the life he could never reclaim. The morning air along Bear Creek in Colorado was crisp and invigorating, carrying the earthy scent of pine trees and damp soil. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting a golden light over the rugged terrain that bordered the winding creek. Park Ranger Claire Thompson, 29, had been assigned to this stretch of wilderness for the past 3 years and intimately knew its paths, wildlife, and rhythms. Despite the challenges of patrolling such a vast area, Claire loved her work. She found solace in the quiet beauty of nature, a stark contrast to the chaos of the urban world she had left behind. Bear Creek, nestled within a national forest near Dolores, Colorado, was a haven for wildlife. Elk grazed in open meadows, foxes darted through underbrush, and black bears roamed the forested slopes. However, one particular bear had been sighted closer to human activity recently. Reports trickled in of a large black bear foraging near campsites and picnic areas, drawn by the smell of food left behind by careless visitors. Though the bear hadn't displayed overtly aggressive behavior, its increasing proximity to people had become a concern. Claire was tasked with monitoring the situation during her routine patrol. That morning, Claire was equipped with her standard gear, a radio, a first aid kit, and bear spray holstered to her side. Her route followed the creek's winding course, where she stopped periodically to check for signs of wildlife activity. Tracks, scat, and claw marks on tree trunks told her the bear had been nearby recently, but she saw no immediate danger. Her footsteps crunched softly on the gravel path as she moved deeper into the forest, the tranquility of the environment wrapping around her like a warm blanket. About an hour into her patrol, Claire noticed a movement up ahead. Through a gap in the trees, she spotted the black bear lumbering along the creek's edge, its powerful frame silhouetted against the dappled sunlight. It was larger than she had anticipated, its glossy coat rippling with each step. The bear appeared calm, sniffing at the ground and occasionally pawing at rocks for food. Claire paused, her breath catching at the sight of the majestic creature. It was a rare opportunity to observe such a magnificent animal up close. Claire's training had emphasized maintaining a safe distance from wildlife, but in the moment, her instincts faltered. The bear didn't seem agitated or aware of her presence. She reached for her camera, a habit born of her love for photography and documenting her experiences in the field. She moved slowly, angling for a better shot, creeping closer as the bear continued foraging. The thrill of the moment clouded her judgment, and she failed to notice subtle signs in the bear's behavior. Its ears twitching, its head lifting, and its body tensing as it became aware of her presence. Suddenly, the bear turned. Its dark eyes locked onto Claire, and the air thickened with tension. She froze, her heart pounding as she realized her mistake. The bear huffed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the forest. In an instant, the animal charged. The bear's speed was staggering, and its powerful legs propelled it forward with terrifying force. Claire barely had time to react. She stumbled backward, reaching for her bear spray, but the bear was too quick. It collided with her, and its massive weight knocked her to the ground. The impact sent her head crashing against a rock, and darkness consumed her vision as she lost consciousness. Another park ranger, Ian Fuller, was conducting patrol along a separate trail nearby when he heard the commotion. The sounds of snapping branches and guttural roars cut through the forest's stillness, followed by a sharp, desperate cry that sent chills down his spine. Ian sprinted toward the source of the noise, his boots pounding against the uneven ground. When he arrived, the scene before him was harrowing. The bear stood over Claire's motionless body, its claws raking at the ground and its breath coming in heavy bursts. Ian's mind raced as he weighed his options. He knew firing a weapon at the bear would be a last resort, potentially escalating the situation. Instead, he raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack of the gunshot reverberated through the forest, startling the bear. It paused, its ears flicking as it assessed the new threat. Ian shouted and waved his arms, making himself appear larger to intimidate the animal. The bear huffed again, its breath visible in the cool air, before turning and retreating into the dense underbrush. The forest fell silent once more, except for Ian's ragged breathing. Ian rushed to Claire's side, his stomach twisting at the sight of her injuries. Blood seeped from a deep wound on her forehead, and her uniform was torn where the bear's claws had raked across her torso. She was still alive, her breath shallow and labored. Ian radioed for emergency assistance, his voice trembling as he relayed their location. Paramedics arrived within the hour, navigating the rugged terrain with difficulty. Claire was carefully stabilized and airlifted to the nearest hospital, where a team of surgeons worked tirelessly to save her. Despite their efforts, the extent of her injuries proved too severe. Claire succumbed to her wounds later that evening, leaving behind a grieving community and a legacy of dedication to the wilderness she had loved. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the Park Service and the local community. Investigations revealed that Claire's proximity to the bear had triggered its defensive instincts, a sobering reminder of the inherent dangers of wildlife encounters in natural habitats. The incident underscored the importance of adhering to safety guidelines, respecting the boundaries of wild animals, and maintaining a safe distance at all times. On August 20th, 2021, Jack Simmons, a seasoned fisherman from Anchorage, Alaska, ventured into the rugged wilderness for what he expected to be a routine day by the river. Jack, 50 years old, had spent much of his life exploring Alaska's remote landscapes, with fishing as both his livelihood and passion. The pristine rivers and untamed beauty of the state had always been his solace. On this particular day, Jack set out for the Kobuk River, a location he often described as one of the best fishing spots he had ever known. Jack's journey began early in the morning. Armed with his fishing rod, tackle box, and a small cooler of supplies, he navigated the winding dirt trails that led to the riverbank. The Kobuk River was nestled deep within a forested area, surrounded by towering trees and thick brush. Its isolation made it an ideal spot for catching salmon, but it also meant the area was a habitat for wildlife, including bears. Jack was familiar with the risks, but his experience had made him confident in his ability to stay safe. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Jack set up his gear near a quiet bend in the river. The water was crystal clear, and the gentle sound of the current created a peaceful atmosphere. Hours passed as Jack focused on his task, casting his line and reeling in a few modest catches. He was alone, miles from the nearest road or human activity. It was the solitude he cherished most about his trips, unaware of the danger that lurked nearby. Suddenly, Jack became aware of a rustling sound coming from the dense brush behind him. He paused, scanning the area, but saw nothing. Thinking it might be the wind or a small animal, he returned to fishing. Moments later, the sound grew louder. Before he could react, a massive brown bear emerged from the undergrowth. It was close, its sheer size and presence overwhelming. Jack froze in shock, realizing the bear had likely been drawn by the scent of fish. The bear's charge was immediate and relentless. It lunged toward Jack, knocking him off his feet and into the cold, rushing water. Jack tried to fend off the bear with his fishing pole, but the bear's strength overpowered him. The struggle was brief, yet brutal. The bear mauled Jack, tearing into his flesh with its powerful jaws and claws. The attack continued as the bear dragged Jack underwater, its ferocity leaving no chance for escape. When the river grew quiet again, the only evidence of the tragedy was the scattered remnants of Jack's fishing gear along the shore. Hours later, other fishermen arrived at the site and made the grim discovery. Jack's lifeless body was found partially submerged in the river, marked by the devastating injuries inflicted during the attack. Wildlife officials were immediately notified, and the community was left in shock over the loss of a man so deeply connected to the wilderness. Wildlife officials arrived at the Kobuk River soon after the fishermen reported the tragic discovery. The area was cordoned off, and a team began investigating the scene to understand what had occurred. Jack's body, marked with deep injuries from the bear's powerful jaws and claws, was carefully retrieved from the river. The officials noted signs of a violent struggle along the riverbank, with scattered fishing equipment and bear tracks clearly visible in the muddy ground. These clues painted a vivid picture of the harrowing moments leading to Jack's death. News of the attack spread rapidly through the local community and beyond. Anchorage residents, who were familiar with Jack's love for the wilderness, were heartbroken. For years, Jack had been a respected member of the fishing community, known for his knowledge of Alaska's rivers and his friendly, approachable nature. His loss left a deep void, and many struggled to come to terms with the sudden and violent nature of his death. Wildlife authorities quickly launched an effort to locate the bear responsible for the attack. Given the proximity of the site to other fishing spots, officials feared the bear might pose a continued threat to humans. Trained trackers, equipped with tranquilizers and firearms, followed the trail left by the animal. The bear's tracks led them deep into the forest, where they eventually encountered the massive brown bear. Despite attempts to safely tranquilize it, the bear displayed aggressive behavior. The bear was ultimately shot and killed by officials to prevent further attacks. The incident sparked widespread discussions about safety in bear country. Alaska, with its vast wilderness, is home to thousands of brown bears, and encounters with humans, while rare, can be deadly. Experts pointed out that the increasing popularity of remote fishing and outdoor activities had heightened the chances of such confrontations. Local authorities began emphasizing the importance of bear safety measures, such as carrying bear spray and making noise to avoid surprising animals. A memorial service was held for Jack, with family, friends, and members of the fishing community gathering to honor his life. Stories of his adventures, kindness, and dedication to his craft were shared, and many reflected on the risks that come with living so close to nature. Jack's death became a somber reminder of the delicate balance between humans and wildlife in Alaska. Efforts to improve safety along the Kobuk River and similar areas were soon implemented. Signs warning of bear activity were erected, and permits for fishing in remote locations began to require mandatory safety briefings. These measures aimed to prevent future tragedies and ensure that people entering bear habitats were better prepared. Though Jack's loss could never be undone, his story became a catalyst for change, encouraging others to respect the power of nature while enjoying its beauty. The dense wilderness of Montana stretched endlessly in all directions, a tapestry of towering pines, jagged mountains, and vast, empty roads. It was a land of raw beauty and isolation, where nature reigned supreme, and humans were merely visitors passing through. On a crisp autumn morning in 2007, truck driver Dave Thompson rumbled along a lonely highway, hauling a trailer loaded with produce destined for a distant city. The road ahead was quiet, the hum of his engine the only sound breaking the solitude. Dave had spent years navigating remote routes like these, his life revolving around the rhythm of the open road. A sturdy man in his late 40s, he prided himself on his ability to handle the challenges of long-haul trucking. The isolation suited him, and he relished the moments when he could pull over, stretch his legs, and take in the untouched beauty of the landscapes he traveled through. As the morning wore on, Dave decided to take a break. Spotting a small clearing on the side of the road, he eased his truck to a stop, the hiss of the brakes cutting through the stillness. He climbed from the cab, his boots crunching on gravel as he stretched his arms and shoulders. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of pine needles and damp earth. He didn't notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the unnatural stillness that had settled over the forest nearby. Unbeknownst to Dave, a grizzly bear had been lurking in the vicinity, its keen sense of smell drawing it toward the truck. As the colder months approached, the massive creature with matted fur and sharp claws roamed the area for food. The scent of produce from Dave's trailer had piqued its interest, and it had been following the vehicle's path from the forest, its hunger sharpening its instincts. Dave turned his back to the trees, oblivious to the danger. He reached into the cab for a thermos of coffee, savoring the brief respite from his journey. The bear, hidden in the underbrush, watched him intently. When Dave moved, it interpreted his actions as a threat, its territorial nature overpowering its initial hesitation. In an instant, the bear charged. The attack came without warning. Dave turned just in time to see the massive creature barreling toward him, its sheer size and speed a horrifying blur. He barely had time to react before the bear collided, knocking him off his feet. The impact sent him sprawling onto the gravel, his breath forced from his lungs in a sharp gasp. The bear wasted no time, its primal instincts driving it to secure what it saw as its territory. Its claws raked across Dave's side, tearing through his jacket and into his flesh. Pain seared through him as he struggled to shield himself, his arms raised in a futile attempt to fend off the onslaught. The bear's teeth sank into his leg and he screamed, echoing into the wilderness. Desperation took hold. Through the haze of pain and adrenaline, Dave's hand groped blindly for anything he could use as a weapon. His fingers closed around the cold steel of a crowbar he had left leaning against the truck's tire. He swung the makeshift weapon with every ounce of strength, striking the bear across its shoulder. The blow caused the animal to pause, momentarily stunned. Dave seized the opportunity, swinging again, connecting with the bear's snout. The grizzly snarled, its eyes wild with rage and confusion. Blood dripped from its muzzle, and it backed away slightly, assessing its prey. Dave struggled to his feet, his body trembling and his breaths ragged. He leaned against the side of the truck for support, the crowbar held tightly in his bloodied hands. But the bear wasn't finished. It lunged again, swiping at Dave with a massive paw. The force of the blow sent him crashing back to the ground, his head striking the gravel. Stars danced in his vision, and his grip on the crowbar slackened. The bear loomed over him, its hot breath filling the air, and for a moment, it seemed as though the fight was over. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the bear stopped. Whether it was the lingering pain from Dave's blows or the distant hum of an approaching vehicle, Something caused the animal to retreat. It let out a low growl before turning and lumbering back into the forest, its massive frame disappearing into the shadows. Dave lay motionless on the ground, his body a broken testament to the brutality of the attack. Blood pooled around him, staining the gravel as his breaths grew shallow. A passing motorist, alerted by the unusual sight of the parked truck and the commotion, pulled over and rushed to his aid. The man knelt beside Dave, his face pale as he surveyed the extent of the injuries. An emergency call was placed, and paramedics arrived as quickly as the remote location allowed. They worked frantically to stabilize Dave, but the damage was too severe. He had lost too much blood, and the wounds to his side and legs had caused irreversible trauma. Despite their efforts, Dave succumbed to his injuries before he could be transported to a hospital. The news of the attack sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Wildlife experts later confirmed that the bear's behavior had been driven by hunger and the scent of food from the truck. The incident reignited discussions about the dangers of human-wildlife interactions, particularly in areas where natural habitats intersected with human activity. Dave Thompson's tragic death became a somber reminder of nature's unpredictability and the fine line between coexistence and conflict. His story, which was shared widely in the following months, served as a cautionary tale for those venturing into the wilderness, urging respect for the powerful creatures that call it home. It was early June 2018, and Clara Monroe's career had reached new heights. Known for her fearless reporting, 32-year-old Clara had gained a reputation for diving headfirst into dangerous situations to uncover the truth. Her latest assignment brought her to a national forest in western Wyoming, a vast expanse of wilderness increasingly marked by human-wildlife conflict. The rising number of bear encounters, attributed to changing environmental patterns, was a topic she felt compelled to expose. Accompanied by Ethan Hayes, a grizzled local guide with decades of experience, Clara planned to document the grizzlies' shifting behavior in their natural habitat. Following signs of bear activity, they trekked deep into the forest for days. Tracks crisscrossed muddy trails, claw marks scarred towering pines, and stripped-clean elk carcasses hinted at the predator's presence. Clara, armed with her camera and unwavering determination, captured every detail. Ethan carried the survival tools, bear spray, flares, and a rifle, though he was reluctant to use them unless necessary. By the 5th day, they had ventured further than most dared, reaching an area few had documented. The forest felt different here, denser, quieter. Even the birds seemed wary, their calls muted beneath the weight of the towering evergreens. The morning passed uneventfully, with Clara filming scenic shots while Ethan watched. Around midday, they stumbled upon a clearing where the pungent smell of decay hung in the air. A freshly killed elk lay sprawled in the center, its ribcage exposed, its flesh torn away in jagged strips. Ethan tensed immediately, scanning the surrounding trees. But Clara was over the moon. She felt like this was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. Unaware of the danger, the woman moved closer, adjusting her lens to capture the carnage. She marveled at the raw power on display, zooming in on the claw marks raked across the elk's flanks. Her focus was entirely on the shot, the importance of the story drowning out any sense of caution. Ethan's sharp intake of breath broke her concentration. He had spotted movement, a shadow emerging from the tree line. At first, it was little more than a ripple among the underbrush, but then the grizzly appeared. It was massive, easily over 700 pounds, its shoulders rippling with muscle, and it was watching them with dark and hungry eyes. The bear's reaction was immediate. It charged fearlessly. Ethan shouted a warning, but Clara, absorbed in her work, decided to ignore it. The camera stayed fixed on the grizzly, her hands steady even as her pulse quickened. Surely, she thought, she would have enough time to get out of the bear's path of destruction. But Ethan wasn't playing when it came to safety. The man grabbed her arm, yanking her back, but it was too late. The bear closed the distance with terrifying efficiency, its claws digging into the soft earth. Clara stumbled, her camera slipping from her grasp, and fell to the ground. The bear's roar was deafening as it loomed over her, rising onto its hind legs before crashing down. Its paw struck her with brutal force, flinging her sideways as if she weighed nothing. Clara's cry of pain was cut short as the bear descended, claws raking across her torso. Blood sprayed across the forest floor, stark against the greenery. Ethan fumbled for his flare, his heart pounding as he watched the scene unfold. Clara thrashed beneath the bear, her hands clawing at the ground, desperately trying to escape. The grizzly's jaws clamped down on her shoulder, its teeth puncturing flesh and bone. Her scream was primal, a sound that would haunt Ethan for the rest of his life. He finally activated the flare, the bright light and acrid smoke bursting into the air. He waved it wildly, shouting to draw the bear's attention. The animal paused, its massive head turning toward him, blood dripping from its muzzle. For a moment, Ethan thought it might charge him, but the flare's intensity seemed to unnerve it. Instead, the bear charged toward the forest and disappeared beyond the trees. Ethan dropped to his knees beside Clara, his hands trembling as he assessed her injuries. Her chest was a mess of torn flesh, her breathing shallow and labored. Blood pooled beneath her, soaking into the mossy ground. She tried to speak, her lips forming silent words, but the effort was too much. Ethan's hands hovered uselessly as her body went still, the flare still sputtering weakly beside him. He stared at her lifeless form, the weight of his failure crushing him. The forest around him seemed to close in, the silence now oppressive. In the aftermath, Ethan gathered her equipment, the camera miraculously intact despite the chaos. He carried it alongside her body as he made the long trek back to civilization. The journey was grueling, the weight of guilt heavier than the physical burden. When rescuers arrived, Clara's footage revealed the final moments of her life in chilling detail. The grizzly's charge, her fall, and the ferocity of the attack were all captured with haunting clarity. The video sparked public outrage and debate, with experts dissecting every frame, analyzing the bear's behavior and the circumstances leading to the attack. Some blamed Clara's recklessness, arguing that her focus on capturing the perfect shot had cost her her life. Others pointed to the larger issue of environmental shifts, which had pushed wildlife closer to human activity. Ethan, though hailed as a hero by some for his attempt to save her, couldn't escape the weight of responsibility. He replayed the attack in his mind endlessly, questioning every decision, every second of hesitation. Clara's death became a grim reminder of the dangers lurking in the wilderness. Her story fueled discussions about the balance between journalistic ambition and personal safety, the ethics of encroaching on nature for the sake of a story, and the broader implications of human impact on wildlife. Life continued as it always had in the national forest in western Wyoming. But for Ethan, the scars of that day, both physical and emotional, would never fully heal. The crisp autumn air in a national park located in interior Alaska carried the scent of pine and earth as Adrian Forster, a 34-year-old outdoor enthusiast, ventured deep into Alaska's untamed wilderness. A seasoned hiker with years of experience exploring rugged terrain, Adrian craved solitude and the kind of peace that only untouched landscapes could provide. On this particular trip, he sought to push himself further than ever, trekking miles beyond the park's marked trails into the heart of the wild. His pack was heavy with supplies, maps, a first aid kit, a satellite phone, and food. He carried bear spray on his hip and a knife in his pocket, a small comfort in an environment where the line between predator and prey blurred. In early September 2024, the weather was ideal for hiking. The days were still warm enough to be pleasant, and the nights were cool enough to make the stars seem brighter. Adrian had meticulously planned this trip, poring over maps and weather reports, ensuring every detail of his journey was accounted for. Yet no amount of preparation could account for the unpredictable nature of the wilderness he loved so dearly. Adrian had been hiking for hours that day, following a remote ridge that provided sweeping views of the valleys below. Rolling tundra hills stretched out in every direction, a patchwork of golden grass and dark green spruce. He paused occasionally to take in the scenery, his breath hitching at the sight of distant snow-capped peaks. The only sounds were the crunch of his boots on the dirt and the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. But as the afternoon wore on, a strange stillness settled over the landscape. The usual chatter of birds and the distant calls of animals faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that set his nerves on edge. The unease was initially subtle, an instinctual awareness that something was out of place. Adrian shrugged it off, reminding himself that the wilderness was inherently unpredictable. He adjusted the straps of his pack and pressed onward, his eyes scanning the ground for signs of wildlife. He had seen bear tracks earlier in the day, but they were old, the edges worn by rain and time. He reasoned that the bear was long gone, likely far from his current location. Then, as Adrian rounded a bend in the ridge, he saw it. A shadow emerged from the trees below, massive and unmistakable, a grizzly bear. Its golden-brown coat glistened in the sunlight, and its powerful muscles rippled as it moved. It seemed unaware of Adrian's presence for a moment, its head low as it sniffed the air. But then, the bear's head snapped up, and its dark eyes locked onto him. The moment stretched, heavy and charged, as the bear assessed him from a distance. Adrian's heart pounded as he froze, trying to remember his training. He knew the bear hadn't charged yet, and there was still a chance to defuse the situation. But before he could move, the bear reared up, its massive frame towering above the ground, and let out a deep, guttural roar that echoed across the ridge. The time for strategy was gone. The bear dropped to all fours and charged. Adrian turned and ran, knowing full well that it was futile. His legs burned as he sprinted downhill, the terrain uneven and treacherous. His pack felt like dead weight, slowing him as the bear closed the gap with terrifying speed. He reached for his bear spray, fumbling with the clasp as his mind raced. The bear was on him before he could raise the canister, its momentum knocking him to the ground. The impact drove the air from Adrian's lungs as he hit the earth, pain radiating through his body. The bear's claws raked across his back, tearing through his jacket and skin. He tried to roll away, but the animal pinned him with its massive paw, its breath hot and rancid against his neck. Desperation took hold as Adrian reached for the knife in his pocket, his fingers trembling as they found the handle. He managed to unsheath the blade and swung blindly, the sharp edge slicing into the bear's shoulder. The grizzly roared in pain, momentarily retreating, but its anger grew. It lunged again, this time clamping its jaws around Adrian's leg. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot fire that consumed him as the bear shook its head violently, dragging him across the dirt. Adrian's vision blurred as he swung the knife again, this time striking the bear's face. The blade cut into its cheek, and the animal let go, growling as it backed away. Adrian seized the moment, his body screaming in protest as he crawled toward a nearby boulder. He pressed his back against it, using it as a barrier between himself and the bear. His hands fumbled for the bear spray, finally freeing it from its holster. The bear circled him, its growls low and menacing movements deliberate. Blood dripped from its wounds, staining the dirt beneath its paws. Adrian raised the canister, his hand shaking as he prepared to fire. But before he could act, the bear charged again, its massive body colliding with the boulder. The impact force sent Adrian sprawling, the canister flying from his grip. He scrambled to his feet, but his injured leg buckled beneath him. The bear loomed over him, its teeth bared and eyes wild. Adrian raised his knife one last time, but his strength was gone. The animal struck him with a devastating blow, and the world darkened. Days later, a search team found Adrian's body near the ridge. His pack lay nearby, its contents scattered across the ground, and claw marks scarred the surrounding rocks. The grizzly was nowhere to be seen, having returned to the forest after the attack. Adrian's death sent shockwaves through the park and the wider outdoor community. He had been experienced, prepared and cautious, yet none of it had been enough to save him from the unpredictable dangers of the wild. Following the tragedy, park officials urged hikers to take even greater precautions when venturing into grizzly territory. They emphasized the importance of traveling in groups, making noise to avoid surprising wildlife, and carrying bear spray within easy reach. Adrian's story became a sobering reminder of nature's raw power and the thin line between adventure and survival. For those who followed in his footsteps, the wilderness would never feel the same again. January 6, 2025, in the remote Siberian town of Verkhoyansk, a small police station stood surrounded by thick forests and vast stretches of icy terrain. It was an ordinary winter day with temperatures well below freezing, as the town's handful of officers carried out their duties. Among them were Sergeant Alexei Ivanov and Officer Dmitry Petrov, two dedicated men who had served their community for years. Sergeant Ivanov, a 42-year-old father of two, was known for his calm demeanor and sharp instincts. He had spent most of his career working in the harsh Siberian climate, keeping the town safe from both human and wildlife threats. Officer Petrov, a 28-year-old with a passion for wildlife, had joined the force 3 years earlier. He often volunteered for outdoor patrols, undeterred by the dangers of the wilderness. That morning, Ivanov and Petrov were preparing to head out for routine patrols. The station was modest, with just a few rooms and a small yard where vehicles were parked. Food scraps from the station's kitchen had been carelessly discarded nearby, attracting wildlife in the past. However, no one expected what was about to happen. Around midday, Ivanov spotted movement near the station's perimeter. Two massive grizzly bears, each over 8 feet tall, emerged from the trees. Initially, they seemed to be sniffing around the garbage. Ivanov radioed a warning to his colleagues and stepped outside cautiously to assess the situation. Suddenly, one of the bears charged at him, closing the distance in seconds. As Ivanov tried to retreat, the bear lunged, striking him with its massive paw and throwing him to the ground. The second bear followed, dragging Ivanov into the snow. His screams echoed through the icy air as the bears overpowered him, leaving him gravely injured. Inside the station, Petrov and the other officers heard the commotion and rushed to the entrance. By the time they reached Ivanov, the bears had already begun to move toward the building. The flimsy wooden door proved no match for their strength. The bears broke through, attacking Petrov as he tried to fend them off. He was mauled severely, sustaining deep wounds across his arms and chest. Another officer attempting to assist was thrown aside by the second bear, suffering a broken leg and bruises. Chaos erupted as the remaining officers fired their weapons to scare off the animals. After several tense moments, the bears retreated into the forest, leaving destruction and horror in their wake. The aftermath of the grizzly bear attack on the Verkhoyansk police station was devastating. The once quiet outpost had become a scene of chaos and grief. The snow around the station was stained with blood, and broken furniture, shattered glass, and splintered wood marked the site of the bears' rampage. The air was heavy with shock as the remaining officers worked to stabilize the wounded and make sense of the tragedy. Sergeant Alexei Ivanov lay motionless in the snow, his uniform torn and his body battered by the attack. He had succumbed to his injuries before any help could arrive. Nearby, Officer Dmitry Petrov, although gravely wounded, was still alive. His injuries included deep lacerations across his chest and arms, with blood soaking through makeshift bandages applied by his fellow officers. A third officer, who had been thrown aside during the attack, suffered a fractured leg but managed to crawl to safety before losing consciousness. Emergency services were called immediately, but the town's remote location meant that help was hours away. The officers remaining at the station tried their best to treat Petrov and the injured officer while securing the station from further danger. They set up barricades and posted guards at the entrance, fearing the bears might return. When paramedics and wildlife authorities arrived later that evening, they found a devastated team grappling with the loss of their colleague and the overwhelming trauma of the event. Petrov was airlifted to the nearest hospital in Yakutsk, where he underwent emergency surgery. His survival remained uncertain as doctors worked to repair the damage caused by the bear's claws. Wildlife officers immediately began tracking the bears responsible for the attack. The trail led deep into the forest, where the animals were eventually located and shot. Investigations revealed that the bears had likely been drawn to the station by the scent of improperly disposed food waste. The harsh winter had reduced the availability of natural prey, making the bears more aggressive in their search for sustenance. The small community of Verkhoyansk was left in mourning. Sergeant Ivanov, a beloved figure in the town, was honored with a memorial service attended by residents and colleagues. His death left a deep void in the hearts of those who knew him. Petrov's recovery, though slow and uncertain, became a symbol of hope for the shaken officers. The incident prompted immediate changes in safety protocols. The police station implemented strict waste disposal measures to prevent future wildlife encounters. Local authorities also conducted workshops to educate residents on avoiding bear encounters and responding to dangerous situations. The attack served as a grim reminder of the delicate balance between human settlements and the natural world. In Verkhoyansk, where the wilderness is both a source of awe and a constant threat, the memory of January 6, 2025 would not fade quickly. The community's resilience and efforts to prevent such tragedies in the future became a testament to their determination to coexist with the powerful forces of nature. 2024. The dry October air was heavy with the scent of sagebrush as Mark and Jason Keller walked the perimeter of their family's remote ranch in the foothills of Wyoming's Wind River Range. The brothers, aged 37 and 34, had grown up on this land, tending livestock and working long days under the wide open skies. They knew it was a life filled with hard labor and moments of quiet beauty. As the sun climbed over the horizon that morning, they set out to check on sheep grazing in a distant pasture near the forest's edge. The ranch bordered miles of wilderness, a landscape teeming with wildlife. The elder brother, Mark, carried a weathered rifle over his shoulder, a precaution more than anything else. Predators were a rare nuisance, and the brothers had grown confident in handling the occasional coyote or stray wolf. Carrying a pitchfork, Jason trailed behind, scanning the landscape for signs of trouble. The sheep were spread across a gentle slope, their bleats punctuating the morning. As they moved closer, they noticed an unusual tension among the herd. The sheep clustered tightly together, their heads low and their movements skittish. Mark stopped, narrowing his eyes at the tree line. That was when they saw it, a large black bear moving through the underbrush. Its sleek fur was matted in places, and a patch of dried blood stained its side. The bear moved awkwardly, its gait uneven. At first, the brothers were surprised. Black bears were not uncommon in this part of Wyoming, but they rarely came so close to human activity, especially during daylight hours. Something about this bear felt different. Its movements were erratic, and its head swung low as if disoriented. Mark's brow furrowed as he whispered instructions to Jason, gesturing toward the sheep. They both understood the importance of protecting the livestock, but neither realized the danger they were walking into. The brothers began shouting, their voices cutting through the crisp air. They banged their tools against rocks and fence posts, hoping to scare the bear off. It seemed to hesitate momentarily, lifting its head to look at them. But instead of retreating, the bear's posture shifted. Its ears flattened against its head, and it let out a low, guttural growl that rumbled through the valley. It charged. Mark barely had time to react before the bear closed the distance, barreling into him with the force of a freight train. The impact knocked him to the ground, his rifle skidding out of reach. The bear's claws raked across his chest, tearing through his coat and into the flesh beneath. Mark screamed, the sound raw and primal, as he struggled to fend off the massive animal. Jason froze for a split second, the scene unfolding like a nightmare. Then instinct took over. He gripped the pitchfork tightly and thrust the sharp tines at the bear's side. The bear roared, reverberating in Jason's chest like thunder, but it did not relent. It turned its massive head toward him, its dark eyes blazing with fury, and swiped with one powerful paw. The blow sent Jason sprawling, the pitchfork flying from his hands. Pain exploded in his shoulder as he hit the ground, but he forced himself to get up. Blood oozed from his arm, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He reached for a nearby rock and hurled it at the bear, aiming for its head. The stone struck its mark, and for a moment, the bear recoiled. Mark lay motionless on the ground, his breath shallow and labored. Jason staggered toward his brother, his eyes darting between Mark's broken body and the enraged bear. He grabbed a fallen branch, swinging it wildly as the bear advanced again. Desperation fueled his every movement, but the bear was relentless, its injuries and hunger driving it into a frenzy. The fight was brutal and chaotic, the ground around them torn and bloodied. Jason managed to land a few blows, but each effort only seemed to agitate the bear further. It lunged at him, its jaws snapping inches from his face. Jason fell backward, the branch clutched in his trembling hands as the bear loomed over him. He could feel its hot breath, smell the coppery tang of its blood mixed with his own. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the attack ended. The bear stood over Jason momentarily longer, its body heaving with exertion. Its eyes seemed to glaze over as it sniffed the air, and then it turned and lumbered back toward the forest. The brothers were left in the eerie silence of the aftermath, the only sounds of their ragged breathing and the distant bleating of the sheep. Jason crawled to Mark, his heart sinking at the sight of his brother's lifeless eyes staring up at the sky. He pressed his hand to Mark's chest, but there was no heartbeat, no sign of life. Tears blurred his vision as he realized he was too late. Despite his injuries, Jason knew he had to get help. He stumbled to his feet, clutching his bleeding arm, and began the long trek back to the ranch. Every step was agony, but the thought of alerting anyone kept him moving. When he finally reached the ranch house, he collapsed on the porch, his body giving out from pain and exhaustion. Emergency responders arrived within the hour, alerted by a frantic call from Jason's wife. They found Mark's body near the pasture, surrounded by evidence of the violent struggle. Jason was airlifted to the nearest hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery to repair the damage from the bear's claws and teeth. He survived, but the physical and emotional scars would remain with him for the rest of his life. The incident sent shockwaves through the small ranching community. Wildlife experts later determined that the bear had likely been injured in a territorial fight with another bear, leaving it desperate and more aggressive than usual. Its weakened state had driven it closer to human activity in search of an easy meal, leading to the fatal encounter with the Keller brothers. Discussions about wildlife safety and preparedness gained renewed urgency in the following weeks. Ranchers were urged to carry bear spray and ensure they had clear plans for deterring predators without putting themselves at risk. Jason became a reluctant advocate for these measures, sharing his harrowing story to prevent others from making the same mistakes. Mark's death was a devastating loss, a reminder of the fragile balance between humans and the wild. For Jason, the memory of that day would never fade, the sight of his brother fighting for his life, the deafening roars of the bear, and the realization that even the most experienced outdoors people are not invincible in the face of nature's raw power.